Right, and the recording has started. Thank you, Tim and Sarah, for doing that. And let's get this show on the road. All right, so as folks noticed from my instructions, I did ask y'all to join a little earlier because we will have members of the public within the Zoom call with us today, which we will be admitting. Actually, why don't you just go ahead, Wes, and do an admit all right now. And they'll be with us. They will be asked to be muted throughout the meeting, but we are doing a little bit different strategy than last time because we just didn't have the YouTube license available to us today. So that's why we did a little bit different naming. But once everyone gets in the room here, I will start with my chat. Excellent. All right, so it looks like the waiting room is empty and I think everybody is settled in. So let's get this started. So good Monday morning, everyone. I don't know who the heck scheduled the first thing Monday morning meeting, but we'll roll with it. So it was this guy that did this, but well, thank you all for being here. And I was just explaining before everyone got let into the room. This is a Zoom call that's going to have the committee members and the members of the public as well that just joined the call. Thank you all for being here. Just to make sure that we got everyone kind of straightened out that is on the committee, as well as their technical advisors. I'm going to start with the roll call. So the reason this meeting is being handled a little bit differently than the last meeting is it's not being streamed via YouTube. Basically, we just didn't have the availability of one of our stream license holders. So we had to switch to having everybody access to the Zoom link. Members of the public, thank you very much for joining us on the call. We will not be taking public comment during this meeting, so we do ask that you stay muted throughout this meeting, but I will outline how public comment is going to be handled going forward. I'll handle that a little bit later after the roll call here. So again, if you could just please stay muted throughout the meeting, but you're welcome to stay throughout the whole thing. And there'll be a portion of the meeting that we will break out into breakout rooms. You are definitely welcome to join whatever breakout room you want to observe the proceedings there. And then and if you have trouble with that, we can help you get into a breakout room, but we'll explain that more when we get to it. As far as the meeting itself, just like last time, it is being recorded for future members to view. And the chat will be disabled to focus the conversation for the committee via voice to try and keep things a little more streamlined. But the chat is available if you are having IT issues and you want to reach out to one of our moderators. You can use the chat for that function. So with that, I am going to start with the roll call. And what I'm going to do is just go straight through our charter list. So with that, I'm going to mention secondary representatives that may not be on the call and they weren't required to be on the call. And I'm going to go through all their technical advisors, which weren't required to be on the call as well. So if someone is not there, it's not really an absence. I just want to make sure I get everybody. So I'm just going to start with the top of our charter, work through DNR staff, then our stakeholders, and then down into our technical advisors. All I need is a quick, hey, I'm here, and then we'll move on to the next person. So starting with Eric Canania.
I'm here.
Mandy Camps.
I'm here.
Tammy Ryan.
I'm here.
Dan Storm. Jeff Pritzel.
Good morning.
And then going on to our stakeholders with National Deer Association, Kip.
Good morning, Kurt. I'm here.
Matt. Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, Ralph.
He's going to be off today.
Gotcha. Justin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Wisconsin Bowhunters Association, Bill.
Right here.
Rich. I know I saw Rich on here, or Rick. Oh, all right. I got a message from Rick through the chat. So, and then Sporting Heritage Council, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
Wisconsin Green Fire, Mike Samuel.
My eyes are open.
Excellent. Mike Foy.
Here.
Wisconsin Conservation Congress, Mike Riggle.
Yeah, here, somebody can change my name back to from my granddaughters.
You're the Connie list?
Yeah.
Excellent. Then go down to Joel Taylor.
I'm here as well, thank you.
And then Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Noah. Jeffrey. Moving down to business interests, Solid Waste Management Association, Dave.
I am here. Thank you.
Excellent. Amanda. Thought I saw her on the list.
Yeah, it looks like Amanda's on. I see her mute is on yet, but she is on the call.
Okay, thank you. Next would be Meat Processors Association, but I did get an email from Phil Schmidt this morning. So we'll go to Whitetails of Wisconsin, Ryan.
Present.
Excellent. Lori. All right, and going down to Tribal, Great Lakes Indians Fish and Wildlife Commission, Travis.
I'm here.
Miles. All right, and then Le Coudray, Dan. And Oneida Nation, Shad.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Then Brittany. Then go to Red Cliff, Andrew.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. And then Chase. Okay, and then we'll go to technical support staff. And again, they weren't required to be here, but just want to make sure if they're here that we have them named appropriately. So starting with our DNR support staff, Lindsay.
Here.
Excellent. Dave McFarland, I'm pretty sure isn't here. So Bob Holzman. Ben Beardmore.
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. Then Kofi, I don't think she was going to make it. Then next would be Chris Goodwill. Then Pete Dunn. Natasha.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dan Kroll.
I'm here.
And then going to our Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, Darlene.
This is Dr. Horn. I'm sitting in for Dr. Conkle this morning.
Excellent. So we have Amy with us. Thank you. And then Department of Ag, Wildlife Services, Dan. And then our diagnostics laboratory, Dan Barr.
Hi, good morning. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And then last but not least, Department of Health Services, Lorna. All right, so with that, was there anyone on the committee or our technical advisors that I missed? If I did, if you could please speak up and maybe say what name you might be under. Excellent. Sounds like I did not. So, or they're still having mute troubles, but hopefully it can reach out to me in the chat if needed. All right, so now that roll call is passed, and I appreciate everyone sticking through that, we will continue on with the meeting. And similar to last time, I will kick us off. So we'll start from the beginning here. Welcome to the second CWD Response Plan Committee meeting. While it would be fun to continue to share fun pictures with each other and continue team building, it is probably time to get to work. So this meeting will have a lot more dialogue within the committee. So please reference the ground rules that I sent after last meeting, which have no changes from last time. I didn't receive any further input from everyone. So I'm taking that as an acceptance of the ground rules. Discussing is going to be encouraged throughout this meeting, and asking for clarification from us or other committee members when needed definitely is allowable, makes sense, encouraged. Just as a reminder though, of course, there's going to be points of agree to disagree, and we may just have to move on. As a reminder, input doesn't need 100% acceptance to enter the process for evaluation. As we kind of explained last time, that is one factor of structured decision making. If input comes through and it's solid input, it can definitely go into the process. The content of this meeting will largely be driven by Jen and Christine, our decision analysts. I promise I will start yammering in just a little bit here. They're going to review the portions of last meeting to help with some questions that we've received either during last meeting or after. They'll then lead us in a group discussion on objectives, basically the previous pre-work, and then we're going to wrap up on discussing the pre-work for the next meeting. As probably some people are realizing, pre-work isn't going to stop for a little bit. It is going to be a vital part of these meetings going forward. We do very much appreciate all the work and time that you guys are putting into this. We do ask that groups continue to do the pre-work, as it is an important part of this process. We're not just doing it to keep you and us busy. It really does help the process and helps represent your stakeholders. If there is continued groups that do not do the pre-work, we are going to reach out to those groups and discuss, because again, it is a very important part of this process. So as I stated earlier, when just before the roll call, public comment will not be a part of this meeting, but we do have a plan for public comment going forward. So we're planning a public comment period during our November meeting, which we're working on scheduling that date, and that'll be released as soon as it is known. So that'll be our 4th meeting. We will ask interested individuals to pre-register and then join the Zoom call during the allotted input period, and then be able to say their input during the meeting. So that's the public comment that'll occur during, like I say, these meetings. We also are going to launch a CWD response plan email that'll be for input for folks that are unable to attend the meeting or want to put input in a different method. Comments will be received through that email, then routed to the committee members. More details on both these options will come during meeting number 3, which is October 27th, and also via press releases and other outreach that we can get out to folks. As a point of clarification from our first meeting, I did have a mail list error, which excluded our Sporting Heritage Council representative, Elizabeth Baker, from receiving the first meeting invite. So that resulted in her absence for the first meeting, so no fault of her own. And I apologize for that mistake. And then continue on with just some meeting things. As a reminder, meeting number 3 is scheduled for October 27th, same time frame from 8 to noon, but it is a Wednesday, not a Monday, so middle of the week. All committee members should have received the doodle poll for our November meeting as well. I sent that out in email yesterday. I did get one question that it appeared to them that it was under the Eastern time zone, but I looked at it and it appears to be under the Chicago Central Standard Time zone for me. So if anyone else is having issues on that, let me know, but hopefully those times work for most people. And I guess the only ones would be our National Deer Association folks that are on the other edge, but all us Midwesterners should be good with that time zone. But any issues, just shoot me an email and let me know. But with that doodle poll, if it does have the correct information, please try to have that done by Wednesday. I know that's kind of a tight time frame, but if we could get it done by close of business on Wednesday, then we can get that November meeting scheduled and on calendars, both for our committee, our partners with Ventana and National Wildlife Health Center, and then also with the public comment that we'll be having during that meeting. So I did promise to stop yammering, and I'm getting close. So my next point is a segue into when Jen and Christine will take over. And I'm gonna start by handling a question that we heard during last meeting, and then we did hear after the meeting as well. And basically, it's a pretty big and very good question. Is this process a review of the response plan? The simple answer is yes, it most certainly is. It's that's why it's in the name. But definitely understand why that question is occurring, because we're reviewing the response plan, but we are doing it in a vastly different way than before and using a different method, the structured decision making that is new to almost all of us, including myself. That's why we have Jen and Christine here to help us through the process. And the first step in SDM, structured decision making, is brainstorming a list of objectives, which is what we're going to work on today and what the pre-work was based on. And for SDM in general, and for the first step specifically, it is best completed with a clean slate. So the pre-work kept focused on basically anything that you can think of that you know your stakeholder and the members of the public that you're representing care about. Now, that did get some questions going as far as, can objectives be taken from the previous response plan? Answer is definitely yes. Previous objectives could be taken, and there will be no doubt that some will show up in this process when we're working through it today. We just didn't want folks to become too focused on only the current objectives. Again, for this process to work most effectively, it's that clean slate kind of idea. And then also during, I guess I have written here meeting number 4, but I think that's incorrect. During the next meeting, meeting number 3, we do plan to do a more side-by-side comparison of the current plan objectives and then what comes out of today's meetings or objective list at the end of today's meeting. So there will be more opportunity to do that kind of side-by-side look towards the current plan, which again, we are reviewing and we're a part of. And then if there's any new objectives that come through this process of today. And kind of as to wrap this up and as a reminder, the previous review did add and alter items throughout the response plan, and it did keep things the same. So we expect this review to do the same, but again, it is a very different method. So it does feel different and it takes a little bit to make those connections. And I fully understand that. So hopefully this explanation helps clear that path a little bit. I know there is some stuff that's left to be seen as we learn this process. Gladly take any questions on that now. Otherwise, I can turn it over to Jen and Christine, and they're going to talk a little bit more about process and review of last meeting to try and help with some of those bigger picture questions as we're going through. And as I was talking, I did get one question, or actually, I got a good point of clarification on the doodle poll. The time zone is determined by the time zone of the IP, so internet provider address. So if someone was using something like a VPN or something that was clicking into the East Coast, it would have pulled through on the East Coast. So basically, wherever you're at, if everything's working correctly, it should be pulling the time zone from where you're at. So thanks for that clarification, Mr. Beardmore. Yes. So with that,
Kurt,
yes,
to ask
questions.
a question?
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying the objectives. I think that's very helpful. The other thing that I was wondering about a little bit is the time frame that we're working on. It seems the time frame is fairly short for doing a pretty big amount of work, and I'm just curious what the sort of thinking is at this point. Is it flexible? Would this potentially extend into next year? Or is December sort of a drop dead date?
Excellent question, Mike. And I think I'll let Jen and Christine take over because they're gonna try to or they're going to address that. But if you have additional questions after they talk about timeline, maybe we can handle it that way.
Yeah, I will touch on that in a few minutes here, Mike, and hopefully that'll
Excellent.
address your question. And if not, you know, I'll ask and make sure you can ask clarifying questions.
Perfect. Any other questions for me before I turn it over? All right. Thank you very much. I will turn it over.
All right, let me share my screen. Let me know when you see my slides, Kurt.
See
we're
this?
seeing them.
Yep, not the slideshow quite yet.
Perfect. Okay, now you should see the slide.
Yep, got her.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here on a Monday morning. Hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. And also want to just thank you guys for putting in the effort on the pre-work. You know, I know it can be a little bit challenging, but I appreciate you taking the time to think about your objectives. And today we're going to take time to dig in a little bit deeper so that we make sure that we really capture everybody's input and have a clear and comprehensive list of objectives. So that is our task. So our meetings are going to serve multiple purposes, and this is getting back to what Kurt just touched on with our process and the timeline. We're going to be using these meetings to consider objectives, performance metrics, alternatives, and then the goal statement. Using the SDM process, we're going to define these components with the committee, and we'll actually compare them back to the plan as well. It'll ultimately be up to this committee to decide what input you want to provide to the agency with regards to the review. And we'll simultaneously be contributing to the systems approach process. And I mentioned this last week. I'll give you just a little bit more today, and then next week, Ventana Systems and National Wildlife Health Center will join us in our meeting on the 27th, and they'll further discuss the process themselves and be able to address questions, I'm sure, better than I can. It is a collaborative effort. We'll be developing a decision tool to evaluate how well various management actions affect CWD. And you know, currently it's really hard to evaluate how well we're doing with CWD without a baseline to compare it to. So the modeling tools, the decision tool they're going to help us develop will help us evaluate how our actions compare to a scenario, even for example, where we do nothing, or a scenario where we take the plan and then we add additional actions to the response plan. So we'll examine how well the actions the agency can implement now minimize CWD, but again, also be able to evaluate additional actions. And one's not just that the DNR can implement, but also broader, larger changes such as legislative changes that may influence CWD. So I hope, you know, I think it's a really exciting tool that we'll be using, and you know, I think it'll provide a lot of value for us to see how all these different actions can affect CWD response. Another important component of the systems approach is that the modeling consultants will be directly incorporating the metrics that you identify that are related to your objectives into the model, so that the tool will predict how well actions affect the things that you care about. So beyond CWD spread and prevalence, also how it affects some of your stakeholder interests. For example, like how strategies aimed at reducing deer populations will affect hunting opportunity and hunting tradition in both the short and the long term. Now, this is the slide I showed last week, you know, just acknowledging this is a really complex problem and there's no easy solution. You know, we're here to work with you to make sure we can effectively integrate your interests into the decision-making process and consider these competing objectives. What works well and what benefits one stakeholder group may not do the same for another. And so we want to be really explicit about these really difficult trade-offs. So we're using this different approach for the review. So structured decision-making is different than what has been used before for CWD, but we do think that it's going to help the agency address how it can respond to CWD while balancing stakeholder interests. So specifically, as a refreshed agency is looking for input to guide the decision-making process specifically on the objectives, so what you care about, and then performance measures related to those objectives. Also alternatives, which actions should the agency consider? How are the actions that have been taken so far contributing to CWD minimization? And we'll also be asking for input and feedback on that decision tool again, we'll be developing in partnership with National Wildlife Health Center and Ventana. Just a little bit more about the systems approach. They're going to be helping the state with the response plan review and leading the development of this tool and using specifically causal maps, so kind of like influence diagrams that I showed last week for the sharp-tailed grouse example, and then also models of the CWD system. They have been working with experts already to develop some of the components of these predictive models, but they're also going to work with us to make sure that what you care about is captured in the tool and elicit feedback on how the tool is working. So they'll be joining us next meeting and for the following meetings after that. During the first meeting, they'll give more background themselves and they'll lead a mapping exercise to make sure that we all have a common understanding of how actions and objectives are related. Again, similar to that influence diagram for the sharp-tailed grouse case study. Their work's going to inform the review, but it's part of a multi-year project that is looking to inform CWD management, again, not just from the state's perspective, but also more broadly. So here's a diagram of it. This is our same diagram we've been using with the structured decision-making process. And here's the key difference is that when they are considering consequences, they'll be considering what I'm calling is within the agency decision space. So what can the agency implement now, or what has the agency already implemented? And then a larger decision space, for example, where they're considering legislative changes and things that aren't feasible or aren't on the table from the agency's perspective, at least right now. And so here they've already been working with experts and they'll be working with us to get feedback and help develop that tool. So here's our timeline for review that I walked through during our last meeting. And we're in meeting 2 where we'll be focusing on objectives. So during this process, we'll compare the work of the committee to the plan. We'll elicit your feedback on the plan, your input as part of the review, comparing what you came up with as part of the pre-work in our discussions today to what is already in the plan. There may be no changes at all. There may be significant changes. I think it's open-ended and we're here to really listen to you and make sure we're capturing your input concerning potential revisions or no revisions. So your effort will be captured in an input document. We do have it ending in December, but there is a little bit of flexibility there. And also once Kurt, Christina, and I develop this input document, we'll provide it to the agency to complete the second 5-year review. But before that's finalized, there will be an opportunity to provide comments on that draft before it's finalized. So there will be another chance to come in and provide input to the agency on that second 5-year review. This is a short timeline, yes, but again, so the committee work here is one part of the entire process. And we know we're not going to solve all the problems with even this 5-year or the second 5-year review. But again, the Ventana effort is a multi-year effort. The structured decision-making process is inherently iterative, meaning that we can continue to revisit and revise as necessary, for example, as more research becomes available. So I hope that addresses your question, Mike, but if you have do you have any additional, or did that kind of help lay it out a little bit better?
Thank you, Jen. That's good enough for now. I think. I guess the fact that you clarified that we will be involved in sort of some of the a chance to look at the final review and comment on that is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking the questions. Definitely want to make sure we're all on the same page here. This is a big, daunting task, I know. And are there any other questions at this point? Any points of clarification with the process or how we'll be working with Ventana or the role of this committee? Okay, so digging in more to today. So these are some of the questions we're going to begin to address. We don't expect to fully address these questions today, but these are some of the things by the end of the process that we will be able to answer. So what are the objectives of the committee? Are the objectives of the response plan comprehensive? Are there some that were not explicitly incorporated that should be considered? Are all stakeholder interests considered? Does the committee have input concerning the plan objectives? And what metrics should be used to evaluate the review and more broadly, additional actions for CWD response within Wisconsin? So again, we'll be looking at CWD response plan and also additional response options. So these are the type of questions that this committee will be able to address by the end of our time together. So goal for today, we're jumping into defining objectives. We're going to start with reviewing definitions, so core and sub-objectives and the framework of the consequences table that we talked about last week. We'll review the pre-work. I'll explain what Christine and I did with that work, how we compiled it and tried to organize it. We did so and develop a very rough draft of objectives. So that objectives hierarchy, which is a list of those core and sub-objectives, which we'll present to the group here. And we're going to spend most of the day probing and making sure that we have a comprehensive list, that we have really captured what matters to you in a clear way. So we'll break out in two groups. Well, first we'll go through a couple example responses together, and then we're going to go into breakout groups and revisit the pre-work within those groups. Christine will be in one group, I will be in the other, and there'll be an opportunity. We'll go through some of your responses together, and we'll allow you some time as well to go through those and just make sure that nothing's been missed. We've accurately captured what matters to you within that objectives hierarchy. We'll take a break and we'll revise the objective hierarchy with the full committee. So Christine and I are going to take some time during one of the breaks to compile the lists of both groups. And then we'll have an opportunity within the full committee to make additional revisions and discuss any topics of discussion, any like really sticky objectives that need consideration from the entire group. And then we'll also compare our list to the response plan objectives and make sure there's nothing that was missed that we want to incorporate. So I'll pass it over to Christine. She's going to give us a little refresher on objectives in the following slides.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So as a reminder, objectives are what you really care about. And why we continue to really hammer this home is that having well-defined objectives are really critical to the structured decision-making process for a couple of reasons. To help us create alternatives. So having well-defined objectives can help us to come up with more creative solutions or actions that we might take. Having well-defined objectives also helps us to compare alternatives. As we've talked about in this meeting already and in the previous meeting, CWD is a huge challenge with many conflicting interests. And so if we have these clear objectives, it's going to make it easier for us to compare actions in a way that makes different trade-offs explicit. And also clear objectives help to explain your decision to others. Finally, all of our structured decision steps are going to build from these objectives. So this is a reason why we're spending so much time discussing objectives today. Go to the next slide, Jen. So you've seen this diagram many times now. Objectives, the second step in the structured decision-making process, they're what matters to you with regards to the decision. Another way to think about this is what are we trying to achieve or what are we trying to avoid in CWD response? And we want to really explicitly define the values that drive our decisions, but also metrics for these. So as Jen mentioned, in addition to identifying what matters to us today or in the next meetings, we're going to be working on identifying metrics that will help us to assess how well alternative actions are going to perform at meeting these objectives. I also want to reassure you that we're going to frequently be revisiting these steps. And so if we later in the process identify that there's additional objectives that we need to add back in, we can do that. So even though we're going to have a final version or we're going to have an updated version of our objectives that come out of this meeting today. It's common, and we expect that we may end up going back and realizing that we need to include other objectives later in the process. One of the things that can be particularly tricky that we highlighted in advance of the pre-work is when you're thinking of objectives, it can be easy to jump to alternatives or actions. Alternatives or actions differ from objectives, and that the alternatives are what we can do, what actions the agency should be considering in response to CWD. A couple of strategies that we talked about in the last meeting to differentiate between objectives and alternatives are when you come up with an initial brainstorm, continually asking yourself why to understand what matters most to you. Another thing that you can consider is asking, how would you measure your objective? And if you can't come up with a metric of how you might measure that objective, that might be another hint that it's actually an action. So an example of this, if you have an objective to minimize the spread of CWD, there's a really clear metric that could be associated with that. And that might be, for example, to minimize the number of counties that have a CWD present in 5 years. Okay, go to the next slide, Jen. Thanks. This is a slide that you saw at the last meeting as well. This is the example that Jen provided from colleagues in Minnesota regarding sharp-tailed grouse hunting. And participants in this process identified their preferred objectives as well as their preferred direction of change and organized them into this hierarchical structure. So what you're seeing at the top are the core value-based objectives. And then under each of those objectives at the second and third level, those are those sub-objectives. And this is what we're aiming for out of this committee as well, is to develop an objectives hierarchy with the core objectives and also sub-objectives. So as an example here, one of the objectives was to minimize the regulatory burden. And you can see that on the right-hand side, one of the core objectives. And a couple of the sub-objectives that they identified related to minimizing the regulatory burden were minimizing changes to rules and statutes, minimizing the annual administration of the hunt, and easing enforcing, maximizing the ease of enforcing regulations. So the objectives hierarchy is this complete list of objectives and is really going to set us up for a better decision ultimately. And as a reminder of where we're headed with all of this, the objectives and the metrics that we're going to identify in this meeting and in the next meeting, these are going to be used to build a consequences table. And if you recall, consequences table has objectives, metrics, as well as a whole suite of actions or alternatives that we might consider in response to CWD. And that's going to help us to see how various actions or alternatives impact the various objectives that we identify here today. So this is the direction that we're headed, and why we really want to be clear and make sure that all of your objectives are well articulated, and that's what we'll focus on today. Back to you, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. And just to point out too, so what we'll be doing with Ventana National Wild Health Center will help us fill out some of this objectives hierarchy, but there are other metrics that likely we won't want to or need any kind of model, but instead we can elicit feedback on stakeholder interest. So one example, we'll talk about metrics later today in preparing for the pre-work, but you can see that the credibility as conservationists, this is one of the objectives of the sharp-tailed grouse example, and they developed their own index of 0 to 10, and were able to, as a group, predict how well each of these various harvest regulation scenarios would affect credibility as conservationists, this objective, using the index that they developed. And so these objectives these metrics can be qualitative or quantitative, and I think that's another strength in structured decision making, is that it helps you evaluate some of these really challenging objectives that aren't easy to quantify. And we're doing pretty well on time. We'll take a break in just a couple of minutes, but I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into some of what we've done with the pre-work. All right, so again, today, by the end of the day, we want to be able to fill out the first 2 columns in this consequences table, objectives and sub-objectives. And then we'll begin to work towards metrics. This will be the pre-work today. So we're going to use these to help evaluate how well the plan is helping to achieve the objectives, and also how additional alternatives can help us better achieve those objectives. And again, we can even consider a baseline of do nothing. All right, so we took all of your pre-work and we combined all responses into one Excel sheet. So even in Word document responses that we receive, we put those all into one Excel sheet, and we organized it into core objectives. So there were many items that were actually actions rather than objectives. So it was things that individuals wanted to see done. And that's fine. You know, this was a brainstorm session. So we took those responses and we still tried to classify them as best we could. But we're going to spend some time today. We want to make sure that we haven't missed anything. I'll show you a draft of the objectives hierarchy that Christine and I developed, and then we're going to go through some unclassified responses within our breakout sections. We'll probe a little bit deeper, make sure that we've identified underlying objectives. We're going to go through a few of these as a group and then separate into our breakout rooms. Again, one with me, one with Christine. And in that room, we're going to help you revisit your pre-work and make sure that we've captured your objectives accurately. We'll have you go through your own list and make sure that those objectives are captured within our list. And if there's some sticky ones that you're not quite sure, we're there. We'll walk through them together and help you translate those actions into objectives. And also, if you see changes that are needed, you can tell us in the breakout room. And you know, you can ask us any questions that you have about the process, or anything like that as well. All right, I'm going to bring up the Excel sheet here and just give you a quick peek at what we've done so far. All right, so here were all of the objectives. These are what you guys were provided us: objectives, direction, which was increase, decrease, maintain, and additional notes. We input the person and the affiliation for each one of these as well. And what we did is we just tried to break them out into overall themes for objectives. So we have down here tabs where we separated each one, and we have some that are like unclassified actions. I'm not going to go through this whole document right now, but what I do want to do is provide a couple examples so that we can show you what we're going to be doing in the breakout rooms. So I've got just a couple responses here. I just selected these pretty much at random. So let's go ahead and start with this one: support monitoring for human prion diseases. Now, this is an action. We could support monitoring for human prion diseases. That's one thing we could do. If you think about, there's a pot of money, that could be one place we invest money, or we could invest money in another place. So that also is another way of helping to key in that this is an action. So for this one, why would we want to support monitoring for human prion diseases? Can anybody chime in and think of why this is important?
This is Mike Riggle from
I'll say Jim because. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, doesn't this beg the question as to, why don't people think it's serious? Why aren't people in the endemic area? When you look at the endemic area and how many people actually test their deer before they consume it, why do we only get a small portion of the people that feel that there is any kind of human health aspect? I mean, before we support monitoring for human prion diseases, don't we need to find out why people feel at this point in time there is no reason to do that? Why? That to me is more of an objective. Why are these people ignoring, or is it that they haven't been educated, Or is it that they just choose to ignore it because if you don't see it, you don't believe it? But isn't that kind of more important than an action of supporting monitoring for human prion diseases if we can't even convince people that there is an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's excellent, and that's something we certainly want to capture. And I think you're bringing up a slightly different need or objective within this hierarchy. And so let's table that. I think that's critical, and we want to capture that within the objectives hierarchy. But for let's just focus on this one first, and then we'll delve into some of the other ones within the breakout groups. But maybe maybe your answer still is related. Is this one? Is this an example of a need for education?
So this is Mike Samuel. I think the science is really mixed on the risk to humans. And so to follow up on sort of Mike's comment, yeah, I think we ought to all be concerned. And I think one of the big concerns is that if we do have a human case, that the whole dynamics and nature of CWD and perhaps even deer is going to change dramatically. So to me, this is a really important issue. We need to do whatever we can to minimize human exposure to prions, given the uncertainty of the science.
Yeah, that's great. So let's probably even just a little bit deeper on that. So minimizing human exposure. So why do we want to do that explicitly? What are we trying to avoid by
I'll add to
minimizing?
that, Jen. I think it's important because not all of the prion experts out there agree that the species barrier between deer and humans is as robust as a lot in the wildlife field do. And if it turns out that there ever was, an opportunity to cross the species barrier to human to be affected from deer, we would fundamentally lose the single way that we control deer populations across the entire United States. If hunters couldn't consume the venison, that's a major motivating factor for many hunters. And in addition, that is the single highest factor for the majority of Americans who don't hunt to support hunting. We're receiving, historical support levels from the non-hunting public in the United States right now. And the vast majority of that is predicated on using this for meat. So if we lose the ability to consume these deer, we lose support for hunting. And if we lose support for deer hunting, we lose the backbone of our entire wildlife management system and the funding for that. So I see this as being an incredibly important thing to take a look at.
Yeah, and I think you've highlighted a couple really fundamental objectives, and a couple I'm hearing is that we want to So you're saying that we want to minimize potential impacts to that hunting tradition and that risk of losing hunting as a management tool, and also the hunting tradition. Is that correct?
Yes, as a hunter, I'm certainly big on the hunting tradition. I'm less concerned about our actual tradition. I'm far more concerned about losing the ability of using hunters to control deer populations, and then also about losing support for hunting, which then breaks down the entire wildlife management system that we use here in the United States. Certainly tradition plays in a big part of this though with hunters, and there's a lot of hunters that hunt strictly because of that tradition, but I think there's a lot of things rolled into this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any other ones coming back to minimizing human exposure? So beyond the ones that we've just outlined here, support from minimizing risks to the hunting tradition and minimizing the risk of losing hunting as a management tool. Are there any other things that we're trying to avoid by minimizing human exposure?
Yes, I would say protecting public health.
Yeah, protecting public health.
This is Mike again. I just wanted to add that, we got pretty excited about mad cow disease in Europe. But if you look at the data for that, the actual risk of exposure to humans was only about 1 million to 1. And so I think that's the real question related to exposure. And a lot of people say, well, humans haven't gotten infected yet, but it could be that humans haven't had that much exposure yet. to chronic wasting disease. So there's just so many unknowns here. I think that it's best to be very prudent in terms of keeping that exposure down as much as we can.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm going to write a couple of these down. Minimize risk to
I'd like to comment as well, if that's okay. This is Elizabeth Baker.
Sure, absolutely.
At this point, any other prion disease that currently affects humans, there is no treatment. So it kind of circling back to the human health, public health risk, this is not a disease that we can treat. So the consequences seem far too risky to outweigh any potential benefit of allowing this to continue to spread and cross the species barrier.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a good point as well. Okay. So I think this is pretty good. There may be other fundamental objectives that surface, but I think this is a good example of breaking this down and seeing that this is really an action that affects a couple or several different things that this committee cares about. They're all relevant. Okay, so we're gonna take these and we're gonna capture them within our objectives hierarchy. I'm gonna move on to the next example. And as this is not closing down this discussion at all, we're gonna break out into the rooms and then we can have more time to discuss them more fully. Okay, here's another one. Provide timely and meaningful public information on the annual and cumulative distribution and prevalence of CWD at the county, DMU, and statewide levels. Estimates should include sample sizes, confidence intervals, and trend assessments. All right, for this one, again, why? What are we trying to achieve, or how is this going to help? This action going to help us to better respond to CWD?
Well, since Greenfire submitted this one, I think I guess up to me to comment on it. I think the idea here is that we want to provide enough public information so that people can make informed decisions about what the previous topic was, which is human risk, basically, and what the likelihood of them harvesting an animal that has chronic wasting disease is in the area that they hunt.
Let me see if I can capture that. So you said support the public being able to make informed decisions about hunting?
Yes, where to hunt, what the probability might be for them harvesting an infected animal.
There was another component of that too, right? About where to hunt and.
Oh, and sorry, harvesting an infected animal.
Jen, I think it was knowing the chances of harvesting an infected animal.
Thanks, Dan.
I guess another thing I would add is that it seems to me this is an important part of monitoring what's happening with the disease.
Any others? I think
Jen, I agree with Mike on this one, and I think I agree with Mike, and I think we need to, this is an even bigger issue because, we often tie the straight to hunters, but there's a tremendous number of people out there, just wildlife enthusiasts, that I think deserve to understand this as well. Whether they choose to hunt or not, there's a lot of photographers, nature lovers, outdoor enthusiasts that I think also want to understand, prevalence rate of this disease and, and where it's impacting deer herds more. So, I think this is just an extension of what Mike's added, that, I just don't want us to tie this only to hunters. I think there's a much broader audience out there that cares about deer, understands the value of deer, that that is entitled to this information, and I think is desiring this information as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Does this, so I have help public better understand CWD and deer. So public being more broad than hunters.
Another piece would be, oh, sorry. I was gonna say another piece here would be just evaluating our own, management success or lack thereof, or, we can't evaluate anything we do without monitoring, and, distribution and prevalence are kind of some of the main things we might monitor with respect to disease. So.
Yeah. So to better inform our response efforts, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. All right. I'm sure there are more we can dig out of this, but I think that's pretty good for now. And again, you can see that this is an action that is really helping us to meet several of our core objectives. All right. I'm going to provide one more response. We'll take a break and then we'll go into our breakout rooms. So here's our last one. Prioritize the deer herd health over capital interests. Does anybody have any thoughts on this one? Why do we want to prioritize deer? What do you think some of the objectives are? You're getting some more experience with this now. What objectives are we tackling with this response?
I think the initial thought with this was when it comes to implementing mitigation strategies, sometimes the short-term interests can outweigh the long-term benefits. So targeting the mitigation strategies that would have the highest impact, even at an initial short-term cost.
Yeah, so targeting. And I think an important part here that I'm seeing is short-term versus long-term prioritize over. And these are both examples of where there are actually multiple objectives within this response. So we have two here, and these are specifically indicating that we're considering trade-offs, right? And this one in particular shows that we should be prioritizing deer herd health over this capital interest, but these are both valid values that the state agency might want to consider, right? So what do you think how can we summarize this first one? Prioritize the deer herd health. Like what's that? What are we trying to achieve here?
Protect the health of the public resource.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna write maximize health of the public resource. And how about capital interests? Are there capital interests that we should still consider when making these decisions?
I think an example of this has been the ability to provide CW or deer dumpsters or deer carcass dumpsters. At this point, there's a high need for public inputs, private donations to kind of get some of these dumpsters placed initially with some supportive funding. But how sustainable is it to ask for private donations for an important mitigation strategy? So could we look at prioritizing the herd health and investing in something like this to relieve a barrier to having more accessible deer carcass dumpsters placed?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, there's a lot to unpack with that statement as well. And I'll save some of that for the breakout room, but I'll ask you, so specifically, what are we trying to achieve with dumpsters? I'm hearing some about the investment.
Financial barriers to public participation.
Okay, so with removing financial barriers, just to probe even a little deeper on this one, what is that going to achieve? What are we hoping to achieve by getting more public participation?
So it's pretty clear that, and I think the economics people certainly argue that a healthy deer herd has a huge financial capital benefit to the state in terms of economic drivers. And it would make sense to me to say that we ought to invest some of the value of that resource into maintaining a healthy deer herd, just like we think of human health as well. I mean, losing that financial benefit to the state would certainly be important and have important consequences, particularly in rural communities and places that are really geared to recreational dollars and financial expenses related to hunting.
Okay, so maintaining healthy deer herds to then protect local business or local economies?
Well, even broadly speaking, the state economy, I can't remember the numbers for sure, but I think it's certainly over $1 billion a year is my recollection of the value to the state's economy.
Yeah, so that's a good one. So I think I would even rephrase that. So we have maintain healthy deer herd as one means to supporting state economy.
Jennifer and Mike, this all kind of circles back to what we talked about before, is getting the public, the non-hunting public, to realize that a healthy deer herd is in their best interest from both a public health standpoint. The more prion you put on the soil, the more likely that some other intermediate host may pick it up, and there might be something that goes on there that would then become a much more, because they may never eat venison in their life. So they say, well, that really isn't a threat to me, but putting all this prion out there is a threat to you from a public health aspect, because the more prion we put out there, the more likely it is that something bad's going to happen. Maybe not with the, deer to human species, but deer to something else species. And so it kind of circles back of getting that whole demographic to understand that this is a threat to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so public buy-in and understanding. All right, great. Yeah, again, I know we could talk about this one longer, and we will in the breakout sessions, but I think that's a good start thinking through these. All right, so I'm going to show you real quick the objectives hierarchy. I'm going to actually leave this on a screen too, and then we'll take a break and we'll come back and go into our breakout rooms. So based on everybody's responses, we categorized most of those responses into some overarching objectives. And already just based on this discussion right now, I think some of these will need to be revised. So acknowledging this is not a perfect list. This was, an attempt to give us something to start with here today. And so these are some of our fundamental objectives: minimizing CWD in deer populations, and some of those sub-objectives being minimize prevalence, spatial distribution, and maximizing deer herd health. We also want to maximize or maintain the benefits of deer, which include deer hunting tradition, minimizing impacts to the ecosystem functions provided by deer, maintain economic benefits of deer, and maximizing cultural benefits of deer. We also want to make good use of the limited resources the DNR has to respond to CWD, which includes DNR staff time and other costs such as laboratory costs, things like that, kiosks, etc. Next, we have maximized positive relationships and communications among DNR, stakeholder groups, tribes, and Wisconsin citizens. And so coming back to this effective communication, and potentially now I'm thinking something to add in here is going to be getting buy-in of the public. Next, we have minimized negative impacts or burden to industry. And so here are some of our stakeholder groups that can be negatively impacted by CWD response and CWD. So minimizing burden to landfill operators, commercial venison processors, livestock industry, and the captive cervid industry. And then finally, minimizing the risk to human health and safety. A couple other discussion topics, and I'm sure more will arise in our groups, but I think it's 9:05. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms and we'll go through your pre-work within those rooms. Does that sound good, Christine?
That sounds good. So as we talked about, kind of in our ground rules, please come back at 9:10. So keep us on track with these breaks. So good 5 minutes to stretch your legs. Few reminders, have noticed a few members of the committee not speaking with their camera on. If you do have the bandwidth to support it, please put your camera on to facilitate kind of this group discussion. And with the group discussion, it'll get better in the breakout rooms, I'm sure, but all groups feel free to jump in and have your voice heard. So hopefully we can maybe hear from a variety, especially when we're getting a little bit smaller groups. And then finally, we had a few members of the public that joined since the beginning. A reminder, members of the public, please stay muted throughout this meeting. This is for, you're here to watch, and you're welcome to watch the entire meeting, but there will not be any public comment during this meeting. And we do have one member that's identified as guest. We'd at least ask the members of the public to have some sort of name associated with them with joining. So if that member could rename themselves, if you're having technical issues, please reach out to one of us in chat. But otherwise, we may not be able to have members of the public that are just identified as guests as attendees. So that should be kind of those items, and let people go to break, and we'll be back in 4 minutes now. Took 1 minute from you.
Somebody has their hand raised. I thought I saw.
Yeah, I saw that too. Okay.
Yeah, and that's not a name that I recognize. So I think if this Mark has an issue, reach out and chat, please. But we're again going to keep the discussion here focused on the committee.
Yeah, and I am seeing I'm getting some direct messages too. Apologies if I can't get to them during the discussion. It's a little hard to go back and forth between things, but I will at least take note of them. So thank you.
Would you clarify how we're going to do primary and secondary representatives from the group, from the organizations in this breakout session?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have the primaries speak, and I think the secondaries, if you want to participate, please, if you can, do so through your primary. And that's just to make sure that we can get to every primary who is available, or secondary, you're acting as primary if you're here instead of the normal primary. Does that help?
Yes, I just wondered whether we'd all be in the same group, primary and secondary, both in the same group, or split up.
Yes, that's a good question. And yes, we will put primaries and secondaries in the same breakout session.
So what we'll do is when we get to breakout, I'll have a list up. You'll see a group name. So who's ever associated with that group, join that breakout room. And if you're having trouble with it, we can put you in the room.
And it's already 9:08, Kurt, so let's give a couple extra minutes.
Yep. So let's just bring it to 9:12, I guess. So.
Yeah, and then we'll stay in our breakout rooms. Let's say until 10:15, and then we'll take a 20-minute break.
All right, we are back from the break, or hopefully most of us are. So we're gonna get started on the next step here. And I guess before that, just in some discussions, we are seeming to be getting some chat messages that are not related to just IT issues. Again, the chat is only there for IT issues. If you do have further comments, if you're a member of the committee, please just say so out in front of everyone. If you are a member of the public, please, those comments, there will be a time for those comments, and we'll have those avenues. But again, please focus the chat as best we can on just if you're having trouble naming yourself or something to that extent. And with that, Jen, looks like you're back. So we are ready for breakout rooms. All right. So Wes, if you're ready, if you could get those ready. All right. And then I will share my screen very quickly here. Screen, let's see, hopefully this will work. Are people seeing a roster? That is not.
Yes, we can, Kurt.
Okay, perfect. So for people that are adept at Zoom, if you could please identify either your name or the group that you're representing, primary or secondary, to please join the room. Again, a reminder for the secondary reps, if you're not attending as the primary, just like before, you're not a participating member of this meeting, but you can obviously observe, and then you can always send messages to your primary member in that communication, but the primary attending member is the participating member in this meeting. For members of the public, if you are adept at Zoom, you are free to join either room. If you're having trouble, give us a second, and then I'll open it up to requests, or we'll move you. We'll just do it that way and spread you out as evenly as we can. But as a reminder, you will be there just to observe, just like you are observing this meeting. So please keep yourself muted and just observe the discussion as they're going in these separate rooms. So with that, I guess open it up to committee members. If you're having trouble joining a room, I guess, Wes, how about we just work our way down, and we'll assign and go from there.
Sounds good.
So bear with us a second as we get you into your spots.
I don't see anything that would allow me to join a different room. Is there supposed to be something we need to click on?
Could you help with that, Wes? Is there a spot?
Yeah, so for some people, this is just not going to be visible. For those of you that it is, you should have got a notification that breakout rooms are now open. If you hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a number of options. If one of those options is breakout rooms, go ahead and click on that, and you'll be able to join a room of your choice. If it's not, don't worry, just hang tight. We are sorting people right now.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Let me just check our roster here. All right, so still a few people entering, but just within our group, we'll do a quick introduction so everybody knows who is in here and who you're representing. So we'll have the primaries or the alternates, whichever one's in attendance and participating today, say hi. So I'm just gonna go down the list that I have here. Tammy, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Tammy Ryan. I'm with the DNR, and I'm the chief of the Wildlife Health Program.
And Dan Storm.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Storm. I'm the deer and I'm the deer research scientist focusing on deer and chronic wasting disease for the DNR.
All right, and then is it Shad, or did I pronounce that right?
Yes. Good morning. I'm with Oneida Nation, the Conservation and Land Deputy Director.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And Ryan.
Ryan Rodenkirk, president of Whitetails of Wisconsin.
Welcome. Andy.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Edwards. I'm the wildlife biologist for the Red Cliff Band. I'm the primary representative for the committee.
Welcome, Andy. And Bill. Oh, I think you're muted, Bill.
Sorry about that. Bill McCrary from the Wisconsin Bowhunters Association.
Great, thanks, Bill. Mike Samuel from Green Fire.
Mike Samuel, primary representative for Wisconsin's Green Fire.
And then let's see here. There are a bunch of people in here. Which other primaries do we have or alternates? Who have I missed? I think Eric. Is Eric in our group?
Yep, sorry, double muted. Eric Canania, deer biologist with the DNR, and I'm representing the CWD operations team.
Thanks, Eric. And let me see. Any other stakeholders who haven't spoken up yet? Do we have Wisconsin meat processors in the room? Okay, they may not have been able to attend today. All right, so welcome everybody. Thanks for being in the breakout room. And today, as I said, we're going to go through the pre-work and just make sure we have a nice comprehensive list that we've really tackled, or that we've captured everybody's input within our objectives hierarchy. I'll share the screen again and that list, that very rough revised or rough list that Christine and I put together. And then I'm first going to open it up, and just if anybody has questions, if you want to look through your pre-work, and if there's specific ones that you're struggling with or you don't feel are captured in this list, we'll start with those first. And I also have everybody's pre-work here within the Excel sheet, so we can pull it up and go through them as a group. All right, can you see the objectives hierarchy?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, first I'll just open it up. Does anybody, can you look through your pre-work right now, and are there any that you would like some help thinking through? Similar to what we did with the full group.
Hey, Jen, can you make that bigger, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also put this in a text too. I'll chat it out to the full group so you can bring it up on a different screen if it helps. There we go. That should be in your chat box. Is that big enough? All right, does anybody want to go first? Otherwise, I'm going to go down the list and we'll just bring up your responses and go through them together.
Jen, really quick, these represent what exactly? This represents like your guys' effort to distill what all of the objectives that people put together?
Yes, that's correct. Or at least the main ones that came out. There were some that we couldn't quite tell what we should classify them at. But yes, this is like the main themes, the main kind of core objectives that we have distilled from all of the pre-work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So is everybody checking their pre-work? Do you all have it open? All right. No, everybody a little nervous to go first?
I can go first, this Chad.
All right, great, Shed. I can pull yours up. Are there any in particular that you're looking at and you're not sure if are captured here?
No, I believe they're all captured. Yeah, I believe they're all in there.
Okay, great. And let me just pull yours up and we'll just probe a little bit deeper just to make sure. Let me just filter your results. All right. So now we should all be able to see Shad's responses. Okay, we'll start with the first one. Attempt to limit, reduce the spread of CWD to Oneida Nation's land. So that one I think is pretty well captured in minimize CWD, correct? Are there any other reasons or things you're trying to avoid concerning this objective?
No, that would be it.
Yeah, this one's pretty clear. All right, maintain the availability of carcass disposal dumpster during deer hunting season on Oneida Nation lands. All right, so with this one, what are you trying, or what would you like to achieve with having more carcass disposal options?
Currently, this is kind of twofold. Currently, we have the dumpster available. We've been doing it for a number of years, but we're not getting that participation. It was mentioned earlier in the meeting that people seem not to be concerned about CWD, the testing, just the drive to get those deer carcasses off the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of that, this year we have implemented or added to the plan to have an additional dumpster placed at another site on the other end of our reservation. But I don't know how beneficial that's going to be if they're not utilizing the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where we're caught. So I don't know if that helps explain it or clear as mud kind of deal.
Yeah, no, I think this is good. So I'm hearing, increasing or maximizing the participation of the public. And is that, so that's specifically hunters?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if you did, if the state was able to increase the number of disposals and increase the participation of hunters, how's that going to help with CWD response? How will that help achieve the CWD response efforts?
The intent would be to take those carcasses off the landscape to minimize that prion available in the environment, soil, water sources, all those different components.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so I think that, and then, minimizing prions in the environment. So what's that going to achieve?
Hopefully reduced spread of the disease. And I know there's not a lot of clear science on it, but that could be deer to deer, deer to other species, deer to human, things of that nature also.
Yeah, okay. And so probing even more time further, reducing the spread of disease, why do we want to reduce the spread of disease as an agency?
To keep a healthy deer herd, to help ensure public safety, human safety, promote there's absolutely a economic standpoint behind all of our deer hunting.
So protect economic benefits of deer.
Yes, yep. And then to continue to promote that social component of our hunting culture or heritage.
Okay, those are great. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to bring it back to the list and then make sure we have all of those. And this will be a little bit rough for a while. It'll probably continue to get messier as we discuss, but then we'll work together to, consolidate it to make sure that we don't have redundancies within the list and, wordsmith and things like that. Okay, so based on your response, we have, we want to keep healthy deer herds, and that was a good one. I think that we have in here. So minimizing CWD in the deer population. Something that we don't have in here specifically that I think I'll add will be minimizing prions in the environment. Reducing the spread of disease. So specifically to deer, humans, and other species. And then we also have maintain economic benefits of deer. So I think that one's protect economic benefits of deer. I think that's captured here. And the protecting the hunting culture and heritage. Also one of the benefits of deer we have here. Do you feel like, so have we captured all of your values within this list?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. All right, then moving on to your last one, achieving widespread use of CWD sampling kiosk by local hunters. I think that seems similar to the last one, right? Is there anything else that you think should be added or we should dive deeper on?
I don't know if it fits in here, but in the beginning of the meeting, when you were going through your list out there, we were talking about, or you had the slide around the commingled aspect of everybody, all the different agencies, the tribes, the nations, the bands, groups, and having one, I guess, one area or database with all the same information that people can utilize, so that the Oneida Nation is saying the same thing that the Wisconsin DNR is about CWD. I know the science is always changing and different things coming out, but if we could have just one collaborative area that we could look at, that would be ideal.
Looks like we lost our moderator.
Yeah, did I scare her away or?
Yeah, you were asking for communication, and apparently that was the death knell.
I guess so.
Tammy, I'll look around and see if I can find her here.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know where she went.
Yeah. Hopefully her system didn't crash. The downside of technology.
Hey, Wes, do you know did Jen get dropped from the Zoom session?
Hey, Tim, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, that was weird. I don't know. Did she leave?
She abruptly, yeah, just dropped out. So I thought I'd do some searching for her, but I don't see her in the main room either.
She may have had some connection issues. Oh, I just got an email from Kurt Roman's phone. There has been an internet outage at the Rhinelander office. Hold tight. Him and Jen are joining via hotspot.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll go report back.
Tim, are you able to join the room you want to?
Well, I don't see it again. Where did it disappeared on me?
What were you? Which one were you in?
Number 1.
That is odd. You may, oh. I'm gonna move you to 2 and then move you back to 1. I remember this now. All right, you should be.
So Jen will be with us shortly. There was an internet outage at the Rhinelander DNR office, but they were joining via hotspot. So she should be here very shortly.
I'm back, everybody.
Oh, you're back. You're back.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, you go to the office thinking like, oh, it'll be safer than at home. And, that did not happen. Kurt and I were both just running up and down the hall. I was going to turn on a hotspot, but the internet did just come on. If we do have issues, though, I do have a mobile hotspot, and so I will be able to join regardless of any technical difficulties within the Rhinelander office. So I apologize for that. Yeah, let's just jump back in. Did you guys continue working through any, or does anybody have any questions now that it's been a few minutes?
We just waited for you.
You mean you didn't solve all of the problems?
No, we did not.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Did you want
Okay,
us to-
so.
Did you want
Go
us to
ahead.
comment or discuss some of these things as they come up, or just sort of wait till later? Or what's the approach you'd like to use here?
Yeah, so here, the approach I'd like is for everybody to look through their pre-work and compare it to our list here and make sure that with each response that you entered, so each line within your Excel sheet, that you feel like what you care about most, what your values are being captured within this list. And if there are some you're just not sure about, this is the space to ask me and we'll go through it together. So I'll do the same thing I did with Shad, asking, okay, well, what do you care about? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to avoid? And once everybody feels pretty good about their list, then we can talk about the whole list as a group. And I have specific questions I can ask and make sure that we're all on the same page and that these are clear and comprehensive. Sound good? All right, so somebody can either volunteer to go next if you have a specific question. Otherwise, I'll just go person by person and we'll do the same thing as Shad.
Yeah, this is Bill from the Bow Hunters. I'd be willing to go next.
All right, let's do it, Bill. Let me filter.
Okay.
And I will share my screen. Oh, no. I need to get host privileges again. Give me a moment. Tim, do you mind hopping over real quick, or somebody hop over real quick and just ask Wes in the main room to give me host privileges?
I sure can.
Thank you. That'd be fantastic. We can work through yours, Bill, while we wait.
I have another question for you, Wes. Can you make Jennifer a co-host so she can present?
Um,
I don't think I can do that.
let me join that breakout room 1.
Tammy, I don't know if it was you that pressed record. Does that, like, is there some, is it accessible differently than when the host does it? I don't know. I don't know how
I'm
this
not
stuff
sure,
works.
but I paused it when she left the room, but then when Tim rejoined, it started again. So
Oh, okay. So it's probably under Tim.
it's under Tim, yeah.
You can blame me. That's automatic. Whenever I jump in and out, I think that we hear the voice.
Tim, your screen does show recording though. That's just on my end.
Okay,
Now it started again.
we're back. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks again for everybody's patience. I now have the power to share. You should be able to see my screen again. I feel like a kid in a classroom, like going to ask the teacher, like, to give me the bathroom pass or something. All right, Bill,
Yes, ma'am.
let's do this. Okay, I've got your list here, and then I'll pull up the other one next door, or next to it, our compiled list. So now everybody should be able to see the Excel sheet as well as the draft objectives list. All right, so your first one here, reduce the prevalence and spread of CWD in Wisconsin. So it looks like we have that one well covered.
Yes, I
You
think
agree?
that's well covered. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, and then the second one, Wisconsin should increase or improve communication with the hunting public. This is a really good one. And so why should the DNR do that? What are some of the reasons that communication?
Well, of course, for communication purposes. And I think also that to an extent, there is a credibility issue with the DNR, because some of the hunters that I have talked to simply don't believe some of the information that has come from the DNR. Now, I'm not sure where they're getting their opinions from, but I know I've heard from a number of people, you can't believe that. And I think what the DNR needs to do is, I think they need to get their message out to hunters on a broader level and more frequently. And I think they need to put it in a language that can relate to hunters and that they can understand easily. And I think the goal of that would be a better CWD program statewide on an overall basis.
Okay, yeah, I'm just jotting down some notes here. All right, so increasing and improved communication with hunting public, and with increasing or maximizing credibility. And I guess we don't have that specifically. I'm wondering if that ties in here with this positive relationship and communication with the DNR. and other
Yeah,
entities?
yes, for sure. And so much of this is interrelated. It can be hard to break apart and differentiate the aspects of this, but on an overall basis, I just think the DNR needs to speak to the hunters in a language that they can understand and in a manner that they are willing to accept.
Mm-hmm. Making a couple extra notes here. I think these are really important points and will probably contribute to our discussion about what metrics would be associated with credibility and clear communication with hunters. All right. Do you feel like we've well covered this response then, Phil? Anything
Yes, I
else we
do.
may have missed? Okay. All right. Coming back to your list, ease and increase the convenience of hunter disposal of deer carcasses and deer waste. I think there's a lot of overlap here with some of Shad's responses. And so let's go ahead and bring it up. And can you speak a little bit to it? How will increasing the ease and convenience of disposal sites assist with DNR response?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Sure, absolutely. So what are you trying to achieve with more convenient disposal options?
Well,
how would that help?
I think we need to ease and increase the convenience of it for the benefit of the hunters so that when they do dispose of their deer waste products, they do it in a manner which is very restrictive to spreading CWD prions. I personally know a couple guys, they bone out their deer. They don't feel like driving X many miles to dispose of it in an approved dumpster. So what they do is they take it out to their hunting land and they throw it on their hunting land. Now that's the wrong thing to do if their deer is a CWD positive animal. We know that. But to try to convince them to do otherwise can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And when they find out that their garbage company that services their home, when they find out they won't take deer waste, they're not left with many alternatives that they're willing to accept. And when I say ease and increase the convenience, what I'm talking about is getting more dumpsters and letting hunters know that they're available, when they're going to be available, and they are welcome to use them at their convenience.
Mm-hmm.
But if we make it difficult for people to get rid of this stuff, then we're going to have a problem with them doing it properly.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Okay, so I've written a couple notes here and just let me make sure I've captured it right. So reducing the spread of prions and increasing participation of hunters. Are those correct?
Yes.
Is that a good distillation?
In a nutshell, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so checking back on our list here, so I think this is some of the overlap with what Shad also provided, minimizing prions in the environment. And then I think let's add that. I guess we don't have that. So maximizing participation, right?
Yes.
Does that come down to making efficient use of resources? Do you think that that would be within this objective? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I think it would be, to maximize our use of the resources. This would be part of that, one small part of it, yes.
quick logistical thing to jump in here, Jen. We're both obviously working on hotspots right now, but you're a little bubbly to me sometimes, so it might be your hotspot maxing out with the camera sharing. So I'm not sure if others are experiencing that, but I was instructed that it might help for us to maybe be off camera for Zoom.
Oh, you know what? We are on hotspot, aren't
Yeah,
we?
yeah,
Do we
it's
still
still
not
out.
have
So,
internet in the building?
correct. So yeah, if Jen didn't explain, her absence was the Rylander office unfortunately lost internet. So Jen and I are both working off just cell phone hotspots. So we're probably going to be without camera, just to so we're not sounding underwater to you folks.
Yep, and please let me know if it continues to be a problem as well. I'll call in with a phone for audio if you can't hear me well.
Sound a lot better right now.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully this won't affect our screen sharing.
Hey, Jen, I'm trying to think about how this maximizing use of the safe disposal options fits with this efficient use of resources. It doesn't like, I don't know if that quite fits in my mind, or if maybe there's a better place or a place that it's more prominent. You know, you could think about what's more, you know, making things efficient from an agency standpoint may not maximize, you know, that may not maximize the number of disposal options. I mean, it may be very inefficient for us to have like tons of disposal options that make it easy for the hunter, but that might not be very efficient for us. In the DNR, so which obviously there's going to then be some optimizing that or whatever. But you know, I'm just, you know, I'm saying, like, I'm not sure that they quite fit together in terms of the whatever category. Maybe I'm being too nitpicky with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I wonder if this is more of a strategy or an action rather than a objective. I mean, doesn't this sort of fall under minimizing prions in the environment?
Yeah, that certainly makes good sense to me. Does everybody else agree? Does that sound to make a better fit, Dan?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah.
But you might, do you want to put of hunters in, you know, disposal, or maybe I didn't finish typing it before I interrupted.
Let's see. Maximize participation of hunters disposing of carcasses.
Yeah, maybe in safe disposal or something like that, if that was what was coming down to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the clearer we can get, the better.
This is Andy with Redcliffe. I'll jump in if I may.
Sure.
I think it certainly fits under the, you know, objective of minimizing prions in the environment. I also think this fits under the objective of ensuring that we get the message across that this isn't just a DNR problem and DNR response. It's really everybody that's going to need to work together to, you know, manage CWD on the landscape. Yeah, so I think it's important that everybody has a role in this, and even just to take that one step back, you know, you're asking how do these fit into the DNR response plan. In my mind, it's really more than just the DNR response plan. It's going to have your name and logo on it, but, you know, it's everybody that needs to make this work.
So I'm hearing that there also is some piece of this that needs to go in this effective communication bit. Is that a correct summary of that, Andy?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's communication as much as responsibility someplace.
Oh, okay. So maybe there's a piece in here that we don't have then, that it's the DNR needs to meet its responsibility of communication, or of How would you phrase that, I guess? Let's pose it back to you.
I'm still trying to compose in my head. I think the objective is that we want all stakeholders to recognize their responsibility in managing CWD.
Okay. Does that capture it well, Andy? We can come back to it too as we begin to understand it a little bit better.
I think that's fine for now, yes.
So
I think for now, yes, this definitely is fine. And I just want to make the point again that, you know, so many of these comments we're talking about, so many of these situations, so much of this language is also interrelated that it can be difficult to simply break it apart and say it belongs in this category or that category. I think this whole problem is just so interrelated that it's very difficult to form to put everything in its own particular niche. I just wanted to throw that out for a comment there.
Yeah, and you're not at all wrong, Bill. I mean, I think that's correct. And that's why this problem is so challenging. All these trade-offs and all these actions affect multiple objectives. And so this isn't going to be perfect right now, but we will build toward a more comprehensive list. And once we begin to use metrics and use the metrics to evaluate various actions, it'll help us figure out how to get the structure right. So because structured decision-making is so iterative, we will come back to these things. And but still, as you can imagine, if you translate all these into a consequences table, it makes it a lot easier to see how complex the problem is. It doesn't make the problem less complex, but at least gives us a layout where we can more effectively compare alternatives and see how they are interrelated with all these objectives.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody expects us to come up with the correct answer on the first go around. This is a work in progress, and that's where we are on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just had a couple of simple thoughts. To clarify the sort of disposal of deer, it's not all deer that we will need to dispose of, it's the infected deer. And so part of this is to get hunters to do more testing so they know which deer they should dispose of and which ones it's okay to throw in the back 40. I think that's at least something that should be thought about in that regards. The other thing about the relationships and communications is that we shouldn't neglect either the political decision makers in this process who have a big influence on what happens, be that the Natural Resources Board or the state legislature. Those education and those kind of things are a key part of doing anything about CWD in the long term.
Yeah. So a couple things to ask about there. So first, let me, the disposal piece of infected deer, I've added infected deer here, and I'm hearing, there are other, this might be too myopic here, talking about safe disposal of infected deer. There are other activities too that we're hoping that the hunters will participate in, correct? Like those diagnostics. Yeah, I'm seeing some head nodding. So I'm going to add diagnostics here to make it a little broader. We can wordsmith it a little bit later. And then coming back to the political component of your comment. Yeah, I think that is absolutely part of it. If we want to have a comprehensive list that considers political interests as well. And so I think let's talk about those. If there are some here that aren't being captured, they should be incorporated. All right. So we'll continue on.
Sort of just before just since you asked for a little feedback there, I don't know where this belongs. I don't have a good feel for those kind of aspects, but it seems to me we ought to at least somehow capture it amongst number 4 there. Yes, the people who are going to participate in helping to solve CWD we have to communicate with them, but we also need to convince people up the line who are going to fund these things and make decisions about what deer hunting regulations are going to be and seasons are going to be and all those kind of things, which is not always just those of us who live in the countryside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important point too. So what would we add here? Would that be, political politicians, legislatures, potentially?
I'm hearing decision makers. I think it's all legislators, and he mentioned the NRB, which isn't legislative, although they are, appointed by the governor, but they're not legislators. So decision maker to me seems like a catch-all.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks, Tammy. So how can we do that? How can we ensure that? What are some means to getting us towards this really big goal? Do you have any thoughts, Mike?
I do not. That's way outside my area of knowledge on how to pursue. I'll just leave it there.
Well, I mean, I think part of it might be is that we need to figure out how to do it. We don't necessarily know. I mean, and to me, it's more than just like how good is your messaging. I mean, that's very important. Speaking on the right level, capturing the messages that resonate with the different stakeholders, et cetera. That's extremely important. But like, I think from our perspective, if you think of if you're to talk to the folks in the DNR about who do this stuff, they would say, man, we do a lot of communication around CWD. But what I don't think we know is like what's the reach of that? Because on the flip side, it's very easy to meet people who are just totally clueless. Talking about hunters who have no idea and are totally unengaged. And so I always wonder, what is the reach? Do we know what the reach is? Is there ways to increase the reach of our messaging? And I would like to evaluate, and I think some manner of being able to evaluate that. Not only evaluate and again, evaluating what is the reach in terms of numbers of people, percentages of the folks, the groups we're trying to reach, that sort of thing. And then also evaluating the messaging aspect. I mean, I think there's coming at it from a researcher, we always want to know what's the information we need to make a decision. And, we put a lot of resources in trying to understand the biology and the ecology, and we do plenty of human dimensions research as well. But I wonder if this is a neglected area where we don't really have great information in order to really maximize our decision making there.
Yeah, fully. So using this process, if we're capturing this correctly, we can do so within a consequences table, which is one really cool thing. And another thing with this process too is that by working through it, it's going to make it really clear where additional research is needed to achieve these objectives. And so that very well could be one, Dan, that, hey, we need to know what the reach of our communication is, and how do we increase that reach? So those are two things that I think can come out of this, certainly to help better inform decisions in the future. All right, so trying to capture this as an objective then. How about maximize the reach of DNR messaging how would you state that?
I think DNR messaging is good, personally.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a really good one that hasn't been incorporated yet.
Jen, this is Kurt jumping in. So I just joined the room, so maybe you addressed this, but it is 10 o'clock and no talked about breaks or time frame, or do you want to keep discussion going for a little bit since your absence for those couple minutes?
Yeah, let's go to 10:15 and then take a 20-minute break.
Okay, I'll relay that to Christine as well.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. All right, I want to provide some space now for somebody else who hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet, or maybe we haven't gone through any of your pre-work. Does anybody want to jump in here? Otherwise, we'll start calling names.
Hey, Jennifer, this is Eric. We can dive into the CWD ops teams if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay, I have your list pulled up here. Are there any, you have quite a few, which is great. Are there any that were particularly tricky or that you're looking at and feeling like, I don't think we quite have what I care about captured in this list?
Well, we can go through them briefly. I tried to assign them, and maybe it can just run by you if you think that they fit or not.
Yeah, that's great.
The first one, though, I wasn't able to assign it to one of the items on your list. I think Dan had mentioned something about it earlier in the conversation. We were in the primary group, and really just revolves around maintaining or improving current data collection so we can best inform management decisions, but also evaluate success or failures. So I don't know. I know that at the bottom of that page, you had a discussion topic of science.
Yep.
But feel free to suggest a place for it that maybe I didn't think of.
I think this one can be a tricky one. Where does science fit in and the value of data informing this decision making? And I'm making a note here, but I think that's one we're going to save for discussion with the full group.
Okay.
So super important one. Yeah. Tabling for now. Okay. Moving on. Provide convenient options.
Yeah. So this one kind of maybe fell into conversation we had with Bill earlier. The one below it as well, I think falls under a very similar category. I think convenient options are important. I have potentially could fall in category 1 or 2 to minimize, the effects on current traditions, but also get hunters to participate in them. Working in the endemic area, CWD fatigue is quite real, and I think the easier we can make living in an area such as this for hunters to participate in testing, disposal, other sorts of options is going to help us in the long run in many fashions.
Yeah, I like that minimizing CWD fatigue. Is this where you were saying within the hunting tradition?
Yeah, I mean, because that certainly would fall under that category, but we also would retain folks longer, therefore hopefully, I don't know, maybe reduce spread because we have increased participation. So 1 or 2 there.
Oh yeah, right here. Is that captured in the maximized participation of hunters in?
Yeah, either I think probably most accurately in maximizing participation of hunters.
Okay. So I've just broadened this out to CWD response, and then we can have a list of specific actions or specific response activities.
Okay. And I think, yeah, that 40 there falls under that same category, just stated a little differently.
Yeah, let's see. Provide options to help. Yep. Okay, so that would be some actions to meet this objective of minimizing CWD fatigue. How about examine potential human health issues?
I think that falls pretty well under the objective 6 to minimize risk to human health and safety.
Mhm. All right, potential livestock industry impacts. I think we have that one as well.
Yeah, number 5, and minimize impacts to certain industries.
All right, enable managers to the ability to utilize necessary tools for CWD. All right, well, actually, first, it looks like we're at 10:10. We don't have much more time. Any of these other ones that stick out to you?
Let's see.
Funding sources.
Yeah, the funding source one. I think that was important. We can maybe circle back after the break, if you like, or we can kind of drive through the rest of these real quick. Up to you.
Who else hasn't spoken? Maybe we'll take 5 more minutes for somebody else, and then we'll circle back to some of these.
Ryan Rodenkirk here. I haven't spoke, but I think a number of mine have been covered.
Okay. You want to take a look at them, or do you feel pretty confident?
Yeah, I guess we could pull it up quick.
Yeah, okay. Communication with stakeholders. Carcass movement restrictions. Seems like some of these we've tackled pretty well. Communication with stakeholders. Does what we have here capture that?
Yeah, I think Dan, the last time Dan spoke, he summed that up very well. So I think that, yeah, I think that's covered. You know, mostly the stuff we have is related to, you know, carcass transmission and pathways. That's a lot of our target areas.
Mm-hmm. What was ag land crops?
You know, it's just relating to, you know, forage products, hay, grains, stuff like that, that we know prions can be taken up in, and there's zero regulation on those. So we can have, you know, our thought is there's hay leaving the endemic area going where? Where is it spreading to? Because we know on our side of the fence, it's playing a major role in disease transmission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so is that appropriate under the minimized CWD and minimized prions in the environment? Or are you speaking more towards impacts to agricultural industry?
No, I think the first one you mentioned.
Okay.
And then I
So
guess
spread.
the last comment I guess I have on this entire list we have here is that, you know, under number 5, C and D are the same thing, and that's backed by, you know, captive industry licenses. We have a livestock license, so something just to make a comment on.
Yeah, absolutely. We did struggle with that and talked about it, but we weren't sure if the metrics would ultimately be the same, but we can delve into that more later. You know, we may have different things we want to measure for cattle versus captive served farms.
I'm a little worried about having something that states that agricultural products have CWD in them. There's no scientific documentation of that. And it has huge implications for the agricultural industry because we're already seeing agricultural products in some European countries not being allowed to come into the country from outside areas like North America that have CWD. Unless there's some real science to back this up, I don't think this is something that we should be putting on our list personally.
So you're saying
Yeah, I hear you.
Research to show
I hear you,
that-
Mike. And so I think, well, what we can do here is we frame it in a way where it is an objective, but it's not, we're not making any statements about whether any of these things are scientifically, there's evidence to support them or not. But I think still acknowledging that that is a concern by some of the stakeholder groups is important here.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with the concern, and we certainly need more science to try to figure that out. I was just worried about the way you were phrasing it there partly.
Yeah. Are you more comfortable with this statement, minimize risk of spread? We
I
can
think
circle
for
back.
now, anyway, I'd like to think about it a little more.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, and then I have Hunter Education on here as well, Ryan, and I have that one as something that we're going to discuss as a group as well. It's another one of those kind of tricky topics like science.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so is that good? I think a lot of these come back to diagnostics. It looks like minimizing spread and prevalence, and then also maximizing participation. Is that correct?
Yep, that looks great.
Awesome. All right, it's 10:15. Let's go ahead and take a 20-minute break. I think we've made a lot of progress. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it.
All right. I'm coming into silence. Is this silence because nearing the break, or is Jen having some technical issues?
Yep, so we just entered a break.
Okay, excellent. So way we left it with Christine is 20-minute break. Have folks stay in the breakout room for now. When I can close them and everyone goes to the main room, but let you and Christine get your brains together, see if you need to meet anymore in the breakout room, or we can just move on to the next step of everyone together.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to touch base with her and then we'll get back with you.
Yep, sounds good. So folks that are still here that haven't gone on the break yet, you won't have to do anything. Enjoy your break, and you'll either be in the room when you come back or you'll be in the main room.
Hey, Kurt, do you want to talk with Christine and I, or?
Yes, I certainly can do that. How are you going to handle
The
it?
best way if we should all just get off of this meeting and get onto Skype, or if we can make a breakout room just for the three of us.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that. It might be do it on Skype.
Yeah.
Well, if you can easily join to the main room, let's join the main room and we can ask Wes real quick, but I kind of doubt it.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'll make sure that Christine's good to go as well.
I am back. I'm sharing my screen again. And Tammy, we haven't worked through any of yours. Have you had a chance to take a look? Are there any that you'd like to talk about as a group now?
Sure. I would offer a couple of additions. Some are more, I guess, internally focused for the DNR and our staffing resources and operations. So finding a balance, I guess, with the goals and aspirations that may be identified, while also maximizing effective and efficient workload for department staff. And then the other is that this is something that is pretty commonly heard both internally and externally, is having the tools to manage a disease, or we might know what the tools are, but we can't use them, kind of a thing. So having that identified as well.
Yeah, so okay. So the tools, is that, are you thinking about how can the DNR get more tools on the table?
Well, I would go up to the top, and I think it's more about the management of deer and also the management of the disease. So both, for the authorities that we have as an agency, or the maybe the guidelines that our citizen advisory teams have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of, well, do you have an offering of how to phrase that or how to add that in here?
I think it has to do more with number 1, minimizing CWD. And maybe it would be maximize the opportunity, or maximize the ability to manage the disease.
Mm-hmm.
And
You
then
thinking of regulatory things, Tammy, or are you thinking of things beyond that?
I think
mean, for
regulatory
example,
would, I think regulatory would certainly fall in this thought process. You know, it's not, but it's not just regulatory, but certainly there has been regulatory factors that have ultimately influenced, you know, the management and response to CWD.
Mm-hmm.
what about things like, just as an example, incentive programs and things like that? Is that a limitation you're faced with that you'd like to see changed, or?
I'm thinking more about, well, I guess, yeah, you know, ultimately, I think there are tools that either are identified and aren't being used, or tools that have yet to be identified, or and I think there's some tools that maybe aren't as, you know, kind of almost like an evaluation of tools.
Putting in some notes here now. And I think this process we're using now is really going to help get at this. It's going to identify what are the tools that are available that on the table now that the agency can take to respond to CWD most effectively. And then what other tools might be available, for example, if there are changes to regulations.
Yeah. Yep. And then also, again, we're thinking about not just DNR authority, but also our citizens, you know, our citizen Deer Advisory Council structure that we utilize, and in their decision making or development of recommendations, I should say, and their considerations for CWD and their local deer herds.
Mm-hmm.
And then this idea of having effective and efficient workload for agency staff, I think, is an important one.
Yeah. Does this look good then, Tammy?
Yep, that looks good. And then maybe the one other thing that, if you could scroll up, oh, here, you've got it there, actually, ecosystem benefits of deer. Okay, I didn't see that before.
So there are a couple changes that I made just with going back to Christine, and I'll highlight those now.
Okay, good. Yeah, because the ecosystem services was something I wanted to identify the role of the importance of deer in the natural, you know, in their food chain, basically, the services that they provide to other species. And I'm just looking at my list. And then I think simplifying the processes for hunters as well. I think we kind of caught that. I'm just, let's see.
Does that go under the participation?
Yeah, where was that?
I'm looking for it.
Maximize, maintain. I think here, yeah. I think that was in the metrics. I think you had it under number 1. about contributing. Okay, so just, I'm not sure if that captures the essence of simplification for hunters. Whether it's, I mean, really what I'm
the
thinking about
regulation?
specifically is for sampling. Simplifying sampling, like for example, we're really pushing like the use of the Go Wild form this year. Really trying to get the use of the phone app. And ultimately, ideally, hopefully someday, we can get away from the use of data sheets.
Yeah.
So I think otherwise, I think looking at my list of 22 rows, I think the rest of it's pretty much captured.
Fantastic. Okay. And yeah, so I made a note in here, and let's keep that in the back of your mind, because that could be something that contributes well to a metric to help evaluate how simple the sampling is for hunters. You know, maybe that's something we'll come back to, but I think that's something we would want to measure and consider. Okay. Mike, I don't think we've brought your list up. Would you like to take a look at any of them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there that there's a lot of overlap, obviously, but I think there's some things that maybe could use just a little bit more discussion.
Yeah. Let's do it. There you are. Okay, any in particular?
Well, the first two, I think, have to do with the science part. So I assume we're going to discuss those kinds of things later.
Yep, that's correct. That's a big topic of discussion. So we'll discuss it with the group.
The next two have been covered. I think I'm not so sure about the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we think it's important to eliminate the risk of CWD spread that can occur from private deer operations. So far, only thing I see on the list is that we're not going to impact them. But there's also the possibility of impacts in both directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so let's see.
So it probably comes mostly under spatial distribution, I guess, is the major concern.
Risk of spread from private deer operations?
Yeah, that's great. The next one after that is to maintain an ecologically and probably actually socially acceptable sustainable deer herd. This probably has a lot more to do with deer management, but I think the fact that we have deer populations in the southern part of the state that are considerably above goals hasn't helped us with CWD management, and it's probably has exacerbated spread of the disease, because as the disease increases in prevalence, we get more and more yearling deer that are infected, and those are the big dispersers in spreading of disease, probably.
Okay. And let's see. Yeah, so where should that fit in? We can make it its own objective, and then I think we'll have some redundancies between 1, 2, and this new one, but maybe that's something we can hone in on as we continue.
Yeah, so if I had to put it under the first one, I guess I'd put it under the second part of it. The spread of CWD. I think that's where, from the CWD perspective, so under B, that's where I think it's likely to have the most impact on CWD is. And then, yeah, I would say the next three, I know we have something about hunting tradition, and I'm not sure I fully understand what hunting tradition means. And so I guess the next several ones are an attempt to capture pieces of the hunting experience. And so, we want to maintain a satisfactory hunting experience for people. We want to maximize the opportunity to enjoy hunting and harvest of deer.
Mhm.
And I think the topic we discussed earlier about the importance of license fee money from big game hunting and how important that is to sustaining other conservation needs is something that we need to try to keep as well.
Okay. All right, let's add a couple of these in then. So under this deer hunting tradition, so with that is the hunting experience part of that deer hunting tradition?
Experience and opportunity maybe there.
Yep.
And, part of that opportunity maybe is longer seasons or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So that'd be an example action, changing season structure to maximize hunting opportunity.
That could certainly be that way. Yeah.
Okay, great. And let's see, participation. And then I also have down here underneath our topics for discussion. Christine and I discussed that. That came up in the other group as well. So we'll table that for our group discussion.
Sure. Perfect.
Yeah. So that's good. There's definitely a lot of similarities between the groups.
So another one we have is to minimize the risk of CWD transmission from infected deer to deer that are uninfected. I would say that falls under, at this point, given what we know about the science, that prevalence is probably the best predictor of that. And so if anywhere, it would fall under there.
Okay.
The next couple ones are related to preventing CWD introductions, both from out of the state and then introductions into new areas within the state by spread or whatever. So those are probably come under B.
And then minimize spread.
Well, minimize spread within the state. Yeah. And
All right.
introductions from out of state. Okay, you got that.
Or is that really introductions or the risk of introductions?
Yeah, risk is fine. Minimize risk rather than prevent. Yeah. One of the other ones was on our list was to, and this is probably still, maybe this is in the science or research end, is to maximize the effect that natural predators may have on controlling CWD.
Okay.
Maybe that's under still to be determined science. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Let me just add a little point. We can discuss it. Predators.
Another one is this kind of discussion we had earlier about providing public information, detailed public information about prevalence, trends in disease, those kind of things that we had talked about before we went into the break rooms.
Yeah. So is that captured? Is there something else that we should add in here? Responsibility of all stakeholders, effective communication, reach of DNR messaging. So is that that messaging, or is that information to provide to the public?
I think that's more information to the public about the specifics about what's happening with the disease in their hunt area or where they live, if they're landowners and not necessarily hunters, but so if you want to characterize it as, I don't know if you want to say maximizing it, but increase or provide detailed information about CWD trends, prevalence?
Would this be, first I'll ask you, so is that information part of this new objective here to maximize or increase broad support for CWD response? Do you think that's captured here?
Well, I think it could be. I mean, I think it's generally one effect of it would be to maximize support, but the other is to provide information, meaningful information to the public, so they can have they can make judgments about what the risks are, or what their likelihood of harvesting a positive deer is, and where the disease is, what's happening with trends in the disease.
I see. So
It's really part of public education, I would say, in that sense.
yeah. So I'll add this in here, and we'll come back to education again too.
Okay.
Education to support individual decision-making or public decision-making.
Yeah, I think that would be, and also it was mentioned before in terms of, ability to evaluate management, monitoring process as ability to evaluate management tasks and strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And then the very last one, and this probably is related to what Tammy suggested about the tools, is more information about various approaches to help manage CWD, including seasons, special harvest tags, buck tags, harvest rewards, things like that. So I think that falls under her category of increasing the number of tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hey, Jen, it's Kurt. Just doing a check-in. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, let's okay, everybody. Dan, I feel like we haven't gotten to you. Have your pre-work responses been well incorporated? Did we miss anything? I know science is one that was on your list that we'll come back to.
There's a couple, I don't know if we have a couple minutes, but I think there was a couple that maybe could get added if we had time, or at least considered or whatever.
Yeah, I think we can take 5 more minutes, and then who else? Andy, did you get yours tackled? Do you feel good about yours?
Yeah, I think.
Or anybody else?
Specific questions that you may have, someone in charge of sorting this stuff out, I feel that the topics that are down here pretty much cover the spread of what we submitted.
Okay, great. Yeah, and this is by no means going to be the end of this conversation. We'll revisit all of these. So Dan, let's take a couple minutes to yours, and then Kurt will meet in, 05 or a couple minutes after.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think really quick, the ones that I had would be maintaining increasing hunter numbers, especially in CWD areas, and increasing willingness of hunters to increase deer harvest. And the reason being is that sort of regardless of, there's a lot we don't know about the mechanisms of disease transmission and spread, how much of it's direct contact versus environmental contact versus and yearling dispersal, things like that. But kind of regardless of those, the sort of the answer seems to be always that you want fewer deer, you want a younger age structure if you can. And you can only do that by having more deer harvested. We have, in the farmland especially, we have very little regulatory ability. Like we can offer 3 free tags or 5 free tags, and that doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
We can probably physically stuff tags in people's pockets as they walk out their door to go hunting, although we don't do that anymore, or don't give tags anymore. But you just can't make them harvest more than they want. And also I mean, or there's very little you can do to increase harvest beyond what folks want to harvest. And there's just some there's some hard limits there in terms of just like how many hunters there are. Again, you can give as many tags out as you want, but if our hunter numbers are declining or they're staying static, we've got an aging hunter population, all those things are really constraining our ability to use regulations. Well, they already have constrained our ability to use regulations to influence harvest to the point where we almost can't. So we've got some, and these are really kind of big, difficult things to do. But if we want to be serious about having some ability to use harvest to manage the deer population or manage the disease through the deer population anyway, we've got to somehow make some cracks at these things. So that's all. I mean, and I guess where could that go? I mean, maybe in the, the minimizing prevalence or minimizing, yeah, probably minimizing prevalence, minimizing prions. I mean, either one.
Ordinances in here, we can certainly reduce them down there. So that's my participation of hunters in filling tags or quotas or.
Sorry, in oh, where'd it go? Do we lose her again? Oh shoot.
I'm back.
Oh. You're back, but you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, okay, I'm back. Dan, so that was maximize participation in meeting harvest objectives, maybe?
Yeah, or I would just say, increase hunter participation, hunter numbers, and willingness to harvest more deer.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. Maximize or increase hunter. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm writing increase hunter willingness to harvest more deer. Okay, any other quick ones? We move the main room, Dan, or anybody else?
Oh, thank you. I'm good.
This is Andy. I think I just follow up on what Dan's saying there. I think the big part of that is making everyone understand that their responsibilities in helping manage CWD as well. It's not just what tools again does the DNR have, but how can we all participate and make that work?
Yeah, I think this responsibility stakeholders is surfacing to be pretty important.
Hey, Jennifer.
Well, last call. Yeah.
This is Eric Kennedy. I have one more that I'd like to. I don't know if anybody said anything related to this, but just making sure that we maintain dedicated CWD field staff, research and field staff in the DNR. I don't know if that falls under science or research or anything like that we've already discussed, but that was one that our group was interested in making sure goes forward or at least covered in some capacity.
And I'm sorry, Eric, I got cut off. Can you restate that?
Yeah. Let's see, it would be just to maintain dedicated CWD research and field staff within the DNR.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. And we'll circle back on that one with our science discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, let's all meet back in the main room. Okay, so you can go to leave room, and then you'll have an option to leave room or leave breakout room, and you can select leave breakout room. Hey, Kurt, are you in here? Oh. All right, looks like we're waiting for the rest of the other breakout room to join us. How are they doing, Kurt?
All right. Hopefully people are still. So Wes, it should have when closed the room. We still have a timer as far as people in the room.
Hey, Kurt, you're breaking up pretty bad, but it looks like the breakout rooms have closed and everybody should be back in the main meeting now.
Yeah, we're all here. Christine, are you back as well? Yep. Okay. Well, let's take a 5-minute break. Christine and I will get together one more time, and then we'll come together and combine responses and talk about science, education, and some of these big topics. And this will be the last break of our session. All right, Christine, are you there?
Wes, I'm just doing a mic check here on my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, probably couldn't hear me too well in my last attempt, but for folks that weren't in Jen's room, unfortunately the Rylander office here has an internet outage. So we've both been working off a hotspot. My hotspot is apparently feeling pretty maxed out. So I've switched to phone. So I'll be able to communicate through here, but for the next part, hopefully Jen's hotspot can hold on. And currently Jen and Christine are working together to tidy up those last few items from the breakout rooms, and then we'll do a group discussion. So just a few more minutes here.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry, unless it's a member of the committee, we're not taking any questions at this time or focusing the discussion 100% on committee members.
How do you ask a question of the committee?
Yeah, so the way that we're going to do it is for committee or for input within the meeting. Our November meeting is going to have time to do public input, and then also there'll be an email available for input as well. If you want to get one through immediately, I can have a discussion with you either after the meeting, or I can give you my email as well.
Yeah, I'd like to talk with you after the meeting. I'm a farmer and a hunter in western Wisconsin, and I have questions about the CWD, if it impacts a lot of the older deer, and have some questions about that. So
Okay, excellent, Jim. We'll meet up with you. The meeting is going to be another 45 minutes or so here, but if you could please stay muted for the rest of the meeting, and then we'll certainly touch base.
And so how do I contact you, or how do you want to do that?
How about you give me your phone number, and can I give you a call after this afternoon?
Sure, that'd be great. It's 608-487-2878.
All right, I will give you a call after the meeting here, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This is Jen. I'm switching over to a different audio source because mine keeps cutting out.
Yeah, I switched over to Colin and Jen because I was experiencing the same. We'll give it here a little bit as Jen is joining by phone, but hopefully we still have Christine with full internet functionality around, correct? You may not have joined back up from her meeting with Jen quite yet.
Hear me, Kurt?
You're a little quiet, but
Okay. Trying to get.
you're
Can
fairly
you hear me a
clear.
little better now? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and dig right in then. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully our internet issues have resolved a little bit. But if not, I am on my phone, so I won't get kicked off. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's coming through for me.
Yep.
Perfect. Awesome. So let me just give a quick rundown of what we have here, and then we're going to talk about a couple of the big ticket items. And then in about 15, 20 minutes, Kurt, Holler, and we're going to go over the next pre-work.
Okay.
All right. So Christine and I have put these together. There may be some additional revisions, but given time constraints, we're trying to be more inclusive and exclusive of combining results from the different breakout groups. So we still have this main objective of minimizing CWD and deer populations. We've added a little bit here under prevalence and spatial distribution. Still the same, as much of this is the same as before. We'll also send this list around for the group to take a look at and consider during our time apart. Maximizing opportunity or ability to manage the disease. So this includes regulatory, other tools, DNR authority, and then also considering CDAC recommendations. Maximize, maintain benefits of deer. And we broke down a couple different of these sub-objectives related to what does maintain the deer hunting tradition really mean? Thinking about hunting experience, opportunity, minimizing CWD fatigue, maintaining ecosystem functions linked to deer, and deer's place in the food chain, economic benefits, maximizing cultural benefits of deer, maximizing efficient use of resources, making sure that what the DNR are doing is effective and efficient. So broke this down a little bit further. Informational resources has been added. A big consideration is DNR staff time, but also volunteer time of some of these organizations. Maximizing or increasing broad support for CWD response. Couple sub-objectives here. Maximizing the positive relationship and communication among DNR tribes, Wisconsin citizens, stakeholders, decision makers, which includes legislators and NRB. Ensuring that there's responsibility of all stakeholders to manage CWD. We have effective communication, maximizing credibility of DNR with hunters, maximizing the reach of DNR messaging, and then we have education to support decision-making of public and individuals. minimize negative impacts to industry, and then minimizing risk to human health and safety. So there's a lot to unpack. There's some redundancies in here, but for the next few minutes, I think let's talk about some of these big ticket discussions, and we'll go ahead and start with science. Now, what we're really getting at here is why science? What are some of the reasons that science is so critical in CWD response for Wisconsin?
This is Andy. I'll jump in, I guess. I think it's important to have that underlying knowledge base that can be shown or proven as a reasoning for why decisions are made for management tools. Otherwise, it's opinions versus opinions, and who's right, who's wrong, and there's right and wrong amongst everybody's opinions probably, but having something that can clearly be pointed to that can be shown with very little doubt is useful in justifying their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so would another way to phrase that as an objective essentially be to maximize the value of science for decision making?
Yeah, sounds good.
How does that sit with the group? Is that a fundamental, is that one of the core objectives here? I've typed it into our list. Does anybody have any feelings about this or want to provide any more input related to science?
I think if you should expand that just a little bit to include evaluation of management actions as well, so part of the science is to help make the right decisions to begin with, but part of it is also to evaluate actions that have been taken. There's a lot of unknowns about this disease in terms of how actions might affect the outcome, and so it's important to treat those aspects in a scientific manner as well, so we're making the right decisions on how to change things or move forward.
Okay, I'm breaking it up. So we have maximize value of science for decision making, and then also for evaluating actions, which are pretty interrelated, right? We're evaluating actions so that we make better decisions. Anything else? Are there any other reasons that we want to consider science or we want to maximize the value of science?
For me, I think we just want to utilize the science. Not just evaluate or maximize it, but actually apply it. There should be applied science in our approach.
I'd second that. Tammy's comment,
Yep.
evidence-based
Yeah,
strategies.
that's what this process will aim to do. All right, any additional thoughts on science?
I think part of it is just to be able to accurately communicate just what is happening and just the state of reality with respect to CWD, just to be able to, you can't tell people if you don't know what's going on. So just to, just be able to accurately say, here's what's going on with CWD, here's what's likely to happen in the future. So some forecasting in there as well. But yeah, I think it's important to be able to tell a accurate and coherent story to people so they can, they can decide to act, participate, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like this is an important fundamental objective of this group then. All right. Unless anybody has anything else to add to science, I think let's talk about education a little bit. You know, specifically with education, what are the things that we're trying to achieve? Is education a means to help us achieve our objectives, or is it something that we care about in and of itself?
Jen, this is Kip. I think it's something that we care about in and of itself, but more importantly, it's absolutely what we need to use to achieve our objectives. Without an understanding, we have seen hunters, in many cases don't buy into management we're trying to do. Without understanding, the non-hunting public certainly won't understand the value of deer and why it's important for them to care about this. And without it, we certainly won't gain political support for any of this. So I'd argue it, yeah, definitely is good to have. I think this has got to be one of the top things that we use to be successful in this fight.
Yeah.
And I think that this includes, messaging. There are a handful of examples of other state wildlife agencies using this truly to solve issues they had, whether it was to increase antlerless harvest, in some cases to, voluntarily have hunters protect yearling bucks without being, regulatory. In every one of those cases, though, it is because the agency absolutely owned the issue. And they owned it by just over-educating on it at every case. Always having this at the forefront with what the staff talked about, with what they presented on, what they shared on billboards, etc. So I think the CWD fight is exactly the same. It will be, one from an educational campaign, but it's something that the DNR absolutely has to own, and this just be at the forefront of everything that they say and talk about and do. And because as we know, it takes hunters, numerous times to hear something before they start believing in it, before they start taking action. Sportsmen and women, Wisconsin's not unique, anywhere. It is such a traditional feel for how we do this that it takes repeated messaging before we change our views on anything. So I think that we can do it with this as well. It just has to be something that the agency absolutely owns, and the way to do that is through a strong educational campaign.
Yeah.
Just to dovetail on that, I mean, the strong educational campaign, number one, it's just like training a dog. If you try to train a dog that has learned the wrong thing, now you have to overcome that before you can start on the new. I kind of envy a state that just had CWD discovered, last week in the state, because they've got a lot easier road to hoe than we do with 20 years of history. And history is bad baggage in a lot of cases. So we've got to overcome some of that, the baggage that we carry forward from what's gone on over the years, and now be proactive and re-educate people as to what they really should believe, rather than what people have grown to believe over the last 20 years. And that's a lot harder and a lot going to take a lot more resolve than just doing it from the get-go on a blank slate.
Okay.
Yeah, Jen, something that I heard Mike and Kip and Dan saying are that what they would like to achieve with education. I heard buy-in, I heard action, I heard political support. So I'd be interested in hearing you all or others on the call expand on that a little bit. When you say buy-in, action, support, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by it is buying it, like right now, why aren't people testing? Because they don't believe it to be a perceived threat. People, I don't know why anyone would feed their children venison without testing it first. It's beyond my comprehension. but it's not beyond, and I've, you know, just on a limited thing where I've talked to people down there that, oh, we don't test any of our, well, if it was really a problem, they'd let us know that we need to test it before, you know, before we eat it. So they think that the feeling is that, you know, in the history of the disease, and that be it public health, be it the DNR, that they've kind of downplayed the public health aspect of it. And people say, well, it's really not a big deal. And, you know, whether that, you know, that's the perception. And it would be, and I think it'd be nice to know what exactly, you know, that's my feeling of perception is we've downplayed it for 20 years. You know, I heard people saying, well, we don't want people to think like they're living in a toxic waste zone because they live in, you know, the endemic area. Frankly, I think we do want to make them feel like they're living in a toxic waste zone because they aren't taking the necessary precautions, you know, to stop this disease. So, you know, that perception is difficult to overcome when we haven't made a big deal out of it for, you know, since the get-go.
This is Eric Kennedy. And to add on that, I know that Kip said, I mentioned this being an agency-owned issue or agency maybe being a driving force, but I think education should be also used to put onus or skin in the game for everybody. Dear public trust resource, and this isn't just an agency problem or just a hunter problem, that we're going to get a lot more support, a lot more involvement, activity, if it's educated that this is an issue that affects everyone and isn't just for hunters or the DNR to state agencies to solve. So that might play into a little bit of buy-in support.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think
this is
just the,
great.
oh, sorry. I just think the fundamental thing here is just like, which I think is indisputable, is that education's a prerequisite to action. So you just, it just has to be there. It's completely fundamental to everything. You literally couldn't do anything without people having some understanding of CWD and, you know, what we understand about it. They wouldn't do anything about it if they didn't, and they don't if they don't understand it, like Mike was saying.
How much of that data
Yeah.
comes from our DMAP program? How much is CWD data being collected there?
Well, I think just in because of how little time we have, let's circle back to the education piece later, because what I'm hearing is that it's really one of the most critical tools or most critical things that the DNR can do to achieve a bunch of these objectives. And so we are going to have space to talk about alternatives, and we can brainstorm ideas of like how to actually effectively communicate, effectively get that buy-in. So for now, let's table it. We'll come back to it. And I want to make sure we hit on a couple more of these topics since we're running short on time today. Is that okay?
Works for me.
Okay.
Hey, Jen,
Okay.
I can't help but make a comment if I may. And I know we're going to be talking about education more, and I don't disagree with what's been said, but one kind of cautionary flag that's raising in my mind is that we've done a lot of education, you know, and obviously we can always do more, and that's certainly being identified here today. But just because somebody is informed doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to take the action that you want them to take, right? So I think that's kind of the big, for me, that's the big caveat. So it's really more about like what kind of education or who specifically, you know, do we want to educate, that type of thing.
Well, maybe it's just more than information transfer, information sharing. It's more than that. It's persuasion to hold a certain point of view.
Yeah, I think there's this underlying assumption that if we educate, people are going to do what we want them to do. And
Mhm.
I'm kind of waving a cautionary flag that that's not necessarily the case.
And also, I mean, just if you put the information out there, that doesn't mean that there's education occurring. I mean, there's like different steps in it. You put it out there, but it has to be taken up. So there's these different sort of going from there's information to action. There's all these intermediate steps, and maybe it's worthwhile eventually to think about all those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. Not all education is created equal.
Just giving you a 5-minute warning here, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we have a couple other topics we could talk about next. I think let's take a look here and then see if anything's jumping out to anybody that would really need to revisit now. I know there's some big funding questions and funding for conservation, so maybe we'll use the last few minutes for that. But first, let me go ahead and go through these again, and let's take a look at these objectives, especially the top level objectives, minimizing CWD and deer, and then all the components we broke out here. I apologize, this list has gotten long, so I'm gonna have to do some scrolling. So maximizing, maintaining the benefits of deer, efficient use of resources, achieving or increasing broad support for CWD response from all of these entities, creating and fostering positive relationships and communications among the DNR and others. Again, coming back to that responsibility of all stakeholders to manage CWD, having effective communication, reach of the DNR messaging. So I think that comes back to this efficiency question, like ensuring that education is efficient. Minimizing negative impacts to industry, risk to human health and safety, and then this is the last one, maximizing value of science for decision-making and evaluating actions. Are there any other like big ones that like, whoa, we cannot make a decision, we cannot inform or evaluate the response plan without thinking about this big critical topic? Does anybody have one that's just jumping out at you?
This is Andy. I'll jump in quick, and maybe it fits here, maybe it doesn't. But to me, one key piece that we really need to give some thought to is what don't we know, or what are the research needs? And that could cut across, how it spreads, prevalence rates, what's the best control methods, what's the best educational tools. So I think pointing out what we don't know and thinking of ways to address that is important as well.
Absolutely. And we will hit on that, Andy, in the next few meetings. So we won't have time to go into it today, but certainly part of this process is going to be evaluating what we know, what we don't know, and what are the most important pieces of information that are going to help us make better decisions.
So maybe just a little bit on the science part a little bit. I mean, it would be useful to have some priorities, applied priorities relative to the important unknowns about CWD. And it would be used, it seems to me, it's one thing to say we're going to have science, but you're going to have to support it and fund it if you want it to get done. I guess at least the genesis of the first comment is I'm not sure some of the science being done contributes as much to solving the problem as we need to. So
yeah, and that's certainly one of the highlights of structured decision making, and this process that we're taking on is it's going to make it much more clear which pieces of science are going to be the most helpful. And yeah, so we'll definitely be circling back to science and how science can help us moving forward. All right, any others? Are we feeling pretty confident or pretty comfortable that we've at least hit the most important things that y'all care about that are important to consider with CWD response and the review? Yeah. All right, so what I'm going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the next pre-work. There's going to be a little bit of work that happens between for us to get everything prepared and distill down our list of objectives a little bit better for this. But let me go through the homework, and then there'll be time for questions. And if we have a little bit of time still, we can go back to those objectives and discuss some of them a little bit more and flesh them out, organize them a little bit better. All right. So the pre-work, the next step in this process is that now we've talked about the things we care about, but how do we actually measure those things? And this is really important because we want to be able to evaluate different options and like how they're actually, how well they'll help us achieve our objectives. Let me put this up on, there we go. All right, so what is a metric? It's a unit you use to measure the consequence or outcomes of decision alternatives, so of CWD response activities. And a metric includes content. It's what you're specifically going to measure. Also, the preferred direction of the measured content, increase or decrease, and the aspiration. In a perfect world, would you want to maximize this metric, minimize it? Would you want to seek a particular threshold or a particular level of change? And a quick example of that would be, say we have an objective of establish a reproducing plant population. Our metric might be a 3-year mean flowering stem density. So that metric is stems per meter squared. Preferred direction, we want to increase the stems per meter squared metric. And the aspiration would be to maximize that metric in order to help us meet this objective of establishing a reproducing plant population. The desired characteristics of metrics. What make good characteristics? Well, first, they have to be unambiguous. You need to have a clear relationship to those objectives that you've defined. So those objectives, again, are direct representations of your values, of what matters to you. The metric is going to be a clear measure of how well each action affects those objectives. Metrics need to be direct, so they have to be clearly related to the consequences of interest. They have to be comprehensive, so cover a full range of the possible outcomes. Some of these will make more sense as we get into the pre-work. They have to be operational, so there has to be a metric needs to be available. And sometimes there's not a clear metric, and I'll discuss that in a few minutes, but you can develop a scale that will represent the metrics. And it has to be understandable, so it has to be easily understood and easily communicated so that others can take a look and understand how you made the decision and how each of those actions directly affects the objectives. There are 3 types of metrics that we can use. One being natural, that's something that can be directly measured. So these are the easiest examples. For example, if we want to minimize the number of 6 days taken, we just count the number of 6 days. Maximize popcorn sales would be dollars of sales. Maintain reproductive success. A direct measure would be the number of fledglings. Sometimes we can use proxies. So this is our second type of metric. These are natural or attributes that are highly correlated with the objective. So maybe it's something we can't measure directly, but we have a good proxy for it. A couple examples of proxies would be to minimize, if we wanted to minimize the committee boredom, it would be the number of yawns that I see on Zoom. Maintain genetic diversity, percentage of natural gas or natural range preserved. And maintain reproductive success, number of acres of nesting habitat. So we can't actually directly measure reproductive parameters within a population, but we can fairly easily measure the number of acres of nesting habitat available. And then the final one are constructed scales. So these require some interpretation and careful thought, but again, scales don't always have to be quantitative, they can be qualitative, and I'll walk through a couple quick examples. So a constructed metric example. We want to maximize, this one comes directly from the sharp-tailed grouse decision in Minnesota, where their objective was to maximize DNR and hunter credibility as conservationists with regards to sharp-tailed grouse management. That group developed an index of public confidence that the population can support the level of allowed hunting. And so this is something that they define the scale, where the scale goes from 0 to 10, where 0 represents where there's no public confidence. And they use the status quo as that baseline, where what they were doing now, they felt they evaluated public confidence and there was really no public confidence or very little. And then 10 being maximum public confidence, which was represented by the full closure option. And then everything else, all the other alternatives, they rated between 0 and 10. And here's also an example of all of their fundamental objectives before that I highlighted last week. Maximizing the abundance of sharp-tailed grouse, preserving Minnesota's hunting heritage, maximizing DNR credibility as conservationists, and minimizing regulatory burden. And so here are the metrics associated with each. And again, here's that index. So some of these are direct measures, and some of them are proxies. So for example, abundance of sharp-tailed grouse, number of males at Lex in spring in 20 years is a proxy for the abundance. So they didn't actually estimate the total abundance of sharp-tailed grouse, but they were able to estimate the number of males at Lex. And here is their consequences table again. And as I said before, we're building towards this consequences table. Today, we've done a significant amount of work to fill in the objectives part of this. So this column here on the left. The next step is we want to think about how we'd actually measure these things. And that's going to be our task for the pre-work. And here's one more constructed metric example. So this one is minimizing wetland development impacts. So this group developed a scale where the impacts of development projects could be rated using a scale of 0 to 5, described below, with 5 being the greatest impact. And so you can see these can be really detailed, where 0 is no loss of riparian areas and greater than or equal to 300 acres of estuary restored. And 5 was the loss of greater than or equal to 30 acres of riparian area and greater than or equal to 30 acres of estuary, so extreme severe loss. All right, so this is going to be our metrics. We'll be sending out another Excel sheet to fill out where we have the objectives and sub-objectives, and we want to develop a metric for the lowest level of objective within each of those core objectives. So we had our 8 that we developed as a group, and then there are sub-objectives within each of those. We'll go through a couple examples as a group as well. We want to determine what a metric would be, and we're going to ask you guys what kind of metrics you think would be appropriate or you would like to see the DNR consider and use in this consequences table. Also the direction and the aspiration again. And these can be very easy. It should match up with your objective, but this is a good way to check your objective as well and make sure, like, do these directions match up? And if not, we either need a different metric that better captures the objective, or we need to rephrase the objective in a way that's more representative of what we care about. And another thing to do to help go through this process is to think about a couple alternatives. So for example, you could use a do nothing alternative. You could develop another or consider a couple other alternatives that will help you evaluate, is this actually the metric that we should be using? So for your pre-work, we're going to ask you to come up with at least one metric for each of those lowest level objectives. And then again, list the direction and aspiration. So let's go ahead and do one. And this will be a pretty easy one to start. But for the objective minimizing CWD in wild deer, we had a sub-objective of minimizing CWD distribution. What would be an appropriate metric for this objective? And you can go back to the plan too. The original plan has a few metrics here.
Well, if you're looking at new positives, obviously, how many new positives? How many new positive areas are discovered in a year would be a metric.
And what kind of area are you using, or what's your spatial unit?
Well, it's per county. Everything's done on a county-wide basis now, but new positives, I mean, new positives per county or new counties that show up positive would be, I guess, the metric.
Okay,
I mean,
another new positive.
I'm not sure how the heat map is created, what the exact metrics are, but the heat map of CWD prevalence.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that scale there is really important, and I think counties is one. I mean, maybe you want to think about this in multiple scales, and counties are important for a variety of reasons, but you know, at some point we're getting to be running out of counties without CWD, and there's more to minimizing CWD distribution than the number of counties. For instance, you know, we've got CWD discovered in a certain county, but maybe just as far as we know, a small portion of the county, one corner of the county or something like that. So I think you probably want to include multiple spatial units. And then some spatial units are probably too, well, I don't know. So there's a lot of ways to think through that, but regardless, I think you want to think about multiple spatial units. There's just a bunch of different ways to think about quantifying distribution. Can't really run through all the possibilities right now, but I think just the idea that's worth thinking about and figuring out is important.
Yeah, one of those might be intensity of disease in a given area, like prevalence or something like that as well.
Well, Dan, when you draw, you know, every time there's a new positive in a new county, a zone is drawn around that's 10 miles. And it would be nice to know what is the prevalence in each one of those zones each year. Did the prevalence increase, decrease, or you know, in other words, how many new positives were found in each one of those zones that were, you know, new zones last year?
Yeah,
I mean, another question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I want everybody to think a little bit about this on their own, and then we can discuss as a group. But also to consider, you know, we're talking about the spatial scale, but what is the appropriate temporal scale, especially if we're trying to evaluate, you know, these actions? At what time scale do we need to be considering? Do we care about what the distribution is going to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years?
I think with new positives, you're looking at yearly. And I think the other metric you would look at in new positive zones is, and I don't know how you would put this, Dan, but you know, the number of heads that you need, or the number of samples you need to arrive at a 95% confidence interval in that 10-mile zone, to say that, you know, things are not changing. Because you can say, you know, no new positives in a 10-mile zone. Well, you only had 2 heads submitted. So I think you need to go, you know, what level of confidence, how many heads did we get in that first year to be in a 95% confidence interval, that there are, you know, that there are no positives in that zone.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out a really important tension. I mean, there's a lot of naturalness to doing it annually, because that's, you know, everything we do is kind of, it recurs annually. But it's very often the case that, you know, in an annual basis, we may have little data in any one particular year, and we may not truly, and often these cases, like take Mike's example of, you know, you have this 10-mile square buffer around a new infection, and looking at the yearly changes within that, it may just be the case that it's really hard, if not impossible, to get enough data to be able to say the prevalence has changed from this year to this year or not. So it's really hard to you know, again, like there's some real tensions there, and sort of think about year to year changes. Is that possible? When's that possible? It's important to think about the spatial and temporal scales, but it's not easy to me to think about it like just do this, do this, do this.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, my point is it's important to have those samples in those in those 10-mile zones. And if people aren't complying, I think the public needs to know. I think that's a metric that we need to have available. Say, hey, guess what? We only had, 10 samples in this zone in 3 years. Well, that's not acceptable. And that's where, personally, I think in a new positive, there should be mandatory testing in each one of those zones. And not this volunteer testing, because I've seen that where there's volunteer testing, we just don't get the heads, and now it's 3 years down the road and we haven't had the samples submitted that we need. Whereas if you have a yearly thing saying, okay, we have number 1, mandatory testing, number 2, here's the number of heads we received last year, and we're 50% short of what we would like to see for a 95% confidence interval to say, that it's not here. We're going to continue to sample, but we're short. And I think people need to see that, because people see those new, okay, there's a new spot. Well, what's going on with that new spot? Well, gee, they didn't find any there last year. Well, why? We don't know. And I think that would be an important metric to have out there, that people can look at that and say, oh, well, people aren't complying.
Yeah, so there may be a compliance piece that we need to integrate into our objectives here.
Well, one issue with this metric is it only goes one direction. We only count new counties. We ought to at least have a metric that says, well, did we eliminate any new sparks? I mean, for example, Shell Lake is maybe one of those areas where there was success. So it's like putting something on the endangered species list and it never goes off. We ought to have a positive metric too that we can look at here. They may be few and far between, but it ought to be there.
I think that's right, and that's why. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that was kind of my point, that each one of those, whenever we get one of those 10-mile radiuses, that metric should be applied to that every year. Because yeah, you're right. If we've got that 10-mile radius and we've gotten enough samples 3 years in a row or 4 years or 5 years, that's great news. But each one of those should have that metric every year, not just new county, but each 10-mile zone.
Yeah. So this is a really good discussion. I'm going to have to cut it short, unfortunately, just due to time. But these are the things I want everybody to think about with the pre-work, and then we'll come together and be able to discuss them more fully as a group next week. And I think this discussion alone points out how non-trivial it is to determine which metrics are going to be the most appropriate. So this is an important task. It's not going to be easy, but with all these minds on the call, I think we can make some good progress at least. Okay, so what I'm going to do is Christine and I are going to clean up the objectives hierarchy to send around to everybody, and we're going to have everyone come up with at least one metric per objective. If you think that there's not an appropriate proxy or direct measure and there's a constructed scale, you can try to come up with even just a really rough constructed scale. What would that look like? Do the best you can. I'm also available for questions. Feel free to call me. I'm happy to chat about this stuff with you guys. And then also we'll elicit some more feedback. You'll have some time to digest that objectives hierarchy, to talk to your alternate representative and your organizations and other folks, and elicit some feedback. And so we'll also make space to revisit that objectives hierarchy and make sure we didn't miss anything. All right, with that, it is 12. Are there any other questions? I can stay on a few more minutes, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I really appreciate the good discussion today. We'll compare what y'all have done with the response plan as well. And I think you'll see that there's some things that we've made more explicit already within our work that may not have been in the plan. And with that, Kurt, did you have anything else?
Yeah, just quick jump in. So just backing up what Jen just said. So don't expect the pre-work to be coming today. It'll come once things are shored up, like Jen just said. But as far as immediate next task, if you all could please do the doodle poll for our meeting number 4, which is the November meeting. Again, if you could get that done by Wednesday. But as a reminder for our meeting number 3, the next meeting, that is again October 27th from 8 to noon, and we will have more information coming out on that in the weeks to come. But so as far as clear next steps, will be that doodle poll for meeting number 4, and then you'll get more information from us on the pre-work between now and meeting number 3. But with that, I think to keep it fair for everyone's time, unless there are any pressing questions, I think we'll call it a wrap for meeting number 2 and take a breath from a pretty big day that we've all had.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent.
Yep, thanks, everybody.
Thank you all
Thanks again,
for your time.
everyone.
Thank you.